The fuck is that? Perfect. Yeah, whatever. Just posting real. What the fuck? The light. Yo. Guys, is this Freddy Fazbear? Digga, what the fuck ist hier eigentlich passiert, Alter? What the fuck ist das hier, Junge? Alter. Bah. What? Nee. Hell. Bro, das Ding reißt gleich durch oder so. What the hell ist das? Ich wollte einfach hier zwischenmachen erstmal. Das ist Englisch. 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 Stream. Schere, Digga. Warte mal. Karte ich das einfach ab? Ich meine, muss ja. Ach du Scheiße. Ja, und das restliche Stück einfach hier so drunter machen. I guess. Bro, was ein Scheiß. Junge. Ja, egal. Ja, war schon. Bro, what imagine if I make a Snapchat reel? Will that be good advertisement? Bro, fucking hell, why is this? Okay. Bro, the eyes keep being uneven. Whatever, that makes it actually even better, kinda. How the fuck do I make a Snapchat reel now? Yo, I'm live right now gaming on Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok live / kianflopper. Come, say hi, I will chat. W. Yo, I'm live right now gaming on Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok live / kianflopper. Come, say hi, I will chat. W. Yo, I'm live right now gaming on Twitch, YouTube, and Alter. Ah. How do I change the sound? Okay, the finals sound on Snapchat is crazy. It's 1000 times louder than me, bro. Can't even change the loudness. It's either here me or here the song. Playback settings. Okay, then no sound. Why is the echo now? Auto caption. Next. Live now. Just see what happens. Let's just see what happens. Alright, before we go on the game, we're gonna do a little workout session, maybe. Latest down. I can't find Ryobing download. I can't find the download page. I found it! I found it! Six days ago. It's a newer version. Wait, what? May 27? What's here? May 30? Another one, May 31, okay. This one is the best, I mean newest. I guess. Boom, boom, boom. I guess it's gonna be better. I'm just gonna guess. It's gonna be worth it to update like a few days. Nah, bro, that's not it.
Irankrieg.
Why can I not unmod? Invalid username. What? I can't unmod because the ID is not available. Okay, weird. Un-VIP. 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 Should be the most important for now. Mi bombo! Where do I see the battery percentage of my controller? I guess I just don't. Save. Wait, does it detect what I'm playing right now? No. It somehow doesn't make a difference on the game, I think. Yeah, I don't know how to get frame gen to work on this. Oops. Chest is up here, isn't it? Oops.
Hi. Ah. Oh, oh. Oh, oh. Oh.
Ups. Hmm. Bro, this game, despite not having any mods, still looks so good. If you ignore the minor Graphic glitches. Bro, I jumped. Oh my god. Bro, I jumped to the side. Oh my god. Yeah, we've been here before. Right now, we are just exploring. We are not doing any direct mission. Just looking around, seeing if we miss anything. Just chilling. Well, well, well.
Hey.
Go. Oh, come on. Bruh. Let's go. Something at least hit. Should we go straight for the tower? I think so, maybe. Is it the last ferry we need?
Hey, welcome to Draft Academy. My name is Mike. In this course, I'm going to be teaching you guys everything you need to know to get started writing C++. C++ is one of the most popular programming languages around. Function. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about the basics of writing a C++ program. We're just going to talk generally about what programs are and how we can write them. And we're going to write a little program which is going to print out a shape onto the screen. So this is going to be pretty fun. But down here, I just have this basic program. And when I first created my C++ project in the last tutorial, we sort of got this basic program. And this was kind of given to us. And this is, essentially just a very simple C++ program. So I'm going to walk you guys through essentially what we have here. We're going to talk about a couple different things, and then we'll start writing some code. So up here, we have these two lines of code. This is like hashtag include IOStream, and this one says using namescape std. Essentially, what this does is it's kind of like configuration options for our C++ file. As a beginner, don't really worry too much about what this stuff is or what it's doing. We're going to talk more about all of this stuff later in the course, but for now, just know that you need to have it there in order for us to write our program. Down here, we have this line. It says int main, and there's an open and close parentheses. This is actually what's called a function in C++. Again, don't worry too much about what a function is. I'm just kind of throwing out these words so you're kind of familiar with hearing them. But essentially what this is it's a container for us to put the code inside of our C++ programs. So this function called main is a very special function because any lines of code that we put inside of here, in other words, any lines of code that we put in between these open and closed curly brackets, is actually going to get executed when we run our program. So down here, I just have this thing. It says return 0. And again, don't worry too much about what this is. Just know that you need to have this in this main function. Over here, though, we have an actual line of code. So this says cout, and then it says hello world, then it says end L. And this is a basic line of code in our program. So again, any lines of code that we put in between these curly brackets for this main function is going to get executed when we run our program. So if I was to come up here and run my program, and I'm just going to click this build and run option right here, you'll see when the program runs, it prints out hello world. And you'll see this little window that opened up here. This is what we would call the console. The console is basically just a little window that will output information. So whenever we run our C++ code, this console window is going to open up. And sometimes we can tell C++ that we want to print things out onto this console window. So if you ever hear me referring to the console, I'm just referring to this window right here. Now, let's get down and start talking about programming. So again, any of the code inside this main function is going to get executed. And here we just have one line of code. So what I could actually do is I could copy this, and down below here I could say something else. So I could say just like my name, and now when I run this program, you'll see it's going to print out both of these things. So here on the first line, it prints out hello world, and then over here on the second line, it prints out Mike. And this is just sort of like basically how we could print something out to the console. And you'll see over here it says cout, and that stands for console out. And then over here, you'll see we have this little line that says end, and this stands for end line. And basically, what this means is we're ending the line where we're going to print out text. So you'll notice that we printed out hello world, and then on the next line, we printed out Mike. So using these little print statements, I'm actually going to show you guys how we can write a little program that's going to draw a shape out onto the screen. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of this text. And I'm just going to copy this guy here a couple times. So we'll make like 4 of these. And I'm going to print out a triangle onto this one. So I'm just going to print a // and then we'll do a space and a // and I'm just going to keep doing this, and you'll see we're kind of drawing this little diagonal shape upwards. Now I'm going to use vertical bars, and we're going to go all the way down. So I'm just going to keep going like this, and down here, why don't we put some underscores, and then so you'll see over here I'm actually writing out a bunch of instructions, and each of these instructions in C++ print out a different line. Now when I run my program, we're actually printing out this little triangle. So this is a very basic program, but you'll see just by using those 4 simple instructions, we were able to actually draw something out onto the screen. So let's talk about this. Essentially, what's happening when we click that run button is C++ is going to look inside of our program. First thing it's going to do is look for this block of code. It's going to look for this block of code called main, and inside of these open and close curly brackets, it's going to execute all of the instructions inside of there. And basically, when we're writing a program, all we're doing is we're just telling the computer a bunch of instructions. So we're giving the computer a bunch of instructions that we want it to carry out. So imagine that, for example, in real life, like you were using a recipe. A recipe is a lot like a program. A recipe has a list of instructions. You follow those instructions correctly, then you can make That's basically what a program is. A program is just instructions that we're giving to the computer. And we can like this. As you go through this course, we learn more and more complex instructions, and we learn how to use them together in unison with each other. We're going to be able to tell the computer to do a bunch of complex things. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys about is the order that these instructions get executed. So just like if you were following a recipe and you would start with the first instruction and you'd go down to the last instruction, the computer is going to execute the instruction in order. So it's going to start with this instruction, and basically here we're just telling the computer, or we're telling C++ that we want to print this line of text out onto the screen. So C++ is going to do this, and then once it's done with that, it's going to move on to this instruction. It's going to print this out onto the screen, etc. It's going to keep doing that. So actually, let me show you guys. If I was to get rid of this line and I was to put it up here, now you'll see when we run our program that we're going to print out a funky looking shape. So instead of this base being down at the bottom here, we're going to print it out on the top. And that's because we changed the order of the instructions. So again, all a program is it's just a set of instructions that we give to the computer. That's it. It's very simple. The more complex instructions that we can give the computer, the more ways that we're able to combine those instructions in different ways, the more complex our programs are going to be. So as we go through this course, I'm going to be teaching you guys all sorts of more complex instructions. We're going to learn different ways to do different things and use real-world examples to build little applications, and you'll end up learning a bunch along the way. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about using variables in C++. Now, a lot of times when we're writing programs in C++, we're going to be dealing with all different types of data and information. And a lot of times when we're dealing with that data and information, it can be kind of hard to keep track of. And a variable is basically just a container where we can store different pieces of information or different data values in our programs, and it makes it a lot easier for us to manage and maintain and use that data. So I'm going to show you guys an example, and I'll show you guys basically how variables are useful and how we can use them in C++. So down here I have a very basic program that I've written out. You'll see down here I'm basically just printing out a bunch of lines of text. It says, there once was a man named George. He was 70 years old. He liked the name George, but did not like being 70. So this is basically like my little story here. And you'll see I can run my program, and this is a valid program in C++. It basically just prints out the story, and we have all of our information. So, you know, this is a pretty nice C++ program, and it serves its purposes. But let's say that I'm looking at my story, and I'm thinking, maybe I want to change the character's name. Maybe I don't like the name George, maybe I want to change it to a different name. So what I could do is I could go through and I could manually change it in each line of code. So I could come here where it says George, and I could change it. Let's say we want to change the character's name. So I can change it to John. I'll keep looking through the story. Down here it also says George, so I'll change it to John. And there we go. We've changed the character's name. We've officially updated it. Let's say maybe now I'm thinking to myself, I think I want to make the character a little bit younger. Instead of 70, why don't we make John 35? So I can do the same thing. I can go in and manually change the value of 70 to 35. So we can come over here and we can say he was 70, we'll change this to 35, and we'll say did not like being 70. Okay, so we'll change that to 35 as well. So now we've officially updated our story. We've changed the character's name, and we've changed the character's age. Here's the problem though. In order to make those changes, I had to manually go through and individually edit each one of the places where the character's name showed up or the character's age showed up. And imagine that instead of having a story that was only 4 lines long, I had a story that was like hundreds of lines. We mentioned the character's name hundreds of times, and we mentioned their age hundreds of times. Well, all of a sudden, it becomes a lot more difficult for me to manage those pieces of information. So it's difficult for me to manage the character's name and the character's age. Right? If I had a story that was hundreds of lines long, and we mentioned the character's name 100 times, having to, go and modify and update that name would be a very tedious task because I'd have to go through and essentially just do it manually. This is where something like variables come in. A lot of times in our programs, we're going to have different pieces of information, different data values that we want to keep track of and we want to be able to manage. So what we can do is we can take those pieces of information and we can put them inside of containers called variables. And a variable, like I said, it's just a container where we can store a piece of data, and it'll make it a lot easier for us to use and manage that piece of data in our programs. So I'm going to show you guys how we could create a variable that could store the character's name and the character's age, and you'll see why this can be useful in something like this. So over here, I'm going to create a couple variables. When we create a variable in C++, we actually have to tell C++ a couple of things. The first thing we have to tell C++ is what type of information we want to store inside of the variable. Now, in the next video, I'm going to talk to you guys all about the different types of data that we can use in C++. But for now, I'm just going to show you guys 2 types of data. The first type of data that we can store inside of a variable is called a string. And that basically means it's a string of characters, so it's like plain text. So this down here where it's saying there once was a man named John, this is a string, right? It's plain text in our program. A lot of times we're going to be dealing with strings, so I'm going to create a string variable. In other words, I'm going to create a container that can store a string value. So I'm just going to say string, and that's the first thing that we have to tell C++. The next thing we have to do is give this container, give this variable a name. So what we want to do is give this a descriptive name, which will basically tell us what is inside of the variable. So I'm just going to call this character name, just like that. And what I can do now is I can give this a value. So I could say character name is equal to, and now we can type in the character's name. So I could say John, just like that. All right, so once we've created this character name variable, now this value, John, this string value, is now stored inside of this character name variable. The next thing we're going to do is create another variable to store the character's age. In addition to storing data in the form of a string, we can also store numbers. Now, age is a whole number, so what I can do is I can store it inside of something called an integer. And an integer is basically just a whole number. So I could just say int, and I can just call this character age. Now, I want to show you guys another thing that we can do. So up here, what we did is we said string character name, and we set it equal to a value right away. But what I could also do is put a semicolon here. And also, I do want to point out, whenever we're writing lines of code in C++, every time you finish writing a line of code, you want to put in this semicolon. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the last video, but the semicolon basically tells C that we're done with that line of code. So this separates one line of code from another. So you need to always make sure you put these semicolons. But with a variable, what I could do is I could say int character name. I could do the same thing for string. And then I could go on to a new line and I could give this a value. So I could say like character age is equal to, and now I'm just going to type in a number. So we said that John was going to be equal to 35. And you'll notice when we use numbers, we don't have to surround these with quotation marks. We just can type out the number. So now we have 2 variables, and I showed you 2 different ways that we can create them. And what we can do is we can use these variables inside of our story, and you'll see how this makes it a lot easier for us to maintain this program. So what we want to do is we want to replace every instance of the character's name and the character's age with the variable. So instead of just printing out John here, I want to refer to this variable. And the way that we need to do that is we basically need to include this variable. So over here, I'm printing out this string of text. I'm printing out a bunch of plain text, right? But let's say instead of just printing out John here as plain text, I wanted to instead print out the value that was stored inside of the character name variable. What I can do is I can just get rid of John, and I can say less than sign. And what this is basically going to tell C++ is that we want to take the value that we're going to type out here. So I'm just going to type out character name. And it's basically telling C++ that we want to take this value and we want to insert it right here inside of this line of text. So when I go ahead and run my program now, you'll see that we're still printing out there once was a man named John, except now I didn't actually type out John. All I did was include this variable right here, and I basically just said that we want to put the variable right in there. So that's how we can include a variable inside of one of these print statements. So over here, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to say less than character name. And now this is going to insert the character name. In other words, it's going to insert the value stored inside of the character name variable at this position. We can do the same for the age. So over here, we have the character's age. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to say less than, and now character age. And so the value inside of the character age variable is going to get placed right in there. And we have one more place where we have the character's age. So over here, I'm going to get rid of this. And now this is going to be special. So you'll see over here, we want to insert the value inside of the character age variable right in between all of this text. So I want to put it right here. What I can do is I can make 2 quotation marks. And essentially what this is doing is it's saying this is going to be its own string of text, and this is going to be its own string of text. And I can make 2 less than signs. I can type out the character age variable. And then I'm going to make 2 more less than signs. And this is essentially just going to string all of these together. So it's going to say, print out this text, then print out the value inside of the character age variable, then print out this text. So I've now replaced every instance of the character's age and every instance of the character's name with those variables. Let's run our program and see what happens. Over here, you'll see we have the same exact story as we did before. There once was a man named John, who was 35 years old, John 35. So without having to manually do anything, we were able to include those values. And now what's cool about variables is if I wanted to update the character's name or update the character's age, all I have to do is change it up here in one spot. So if I wanted to change the character's name to Tom, and I wanted to make Tom, let's say, 50 years old, I only have to modify the values that are getting stored in the variables, and they'll automatically update down in our story. So now when I run my program, you'll see it's using the name Tom, and it's saying 50 years old. So that's kind of an awesome way that we can use these variables. Another cool thing that these variables allow us to do is modify the value. So let's say that halfway through our story, I wanted to change the character's name. Okay, so halfway through, I wanted to make the name be a different name. All I have to do is say character name, and I can actually assign this a different value. So I could give this the value of Mike, and again, I'm going to need a semicolon here at the end of this line of code. And now you'll see halfway through the story, the character's name is going to change. So it says there once was a man named Tom, and down here it's using the name Mike. So not only was I able to just use those variables to insert these values, but I can actually modify those variables at different places in my program. So that's pretty awesome. Now, this is just sort of like the bare basics of variables. Variables are containers. They allow us to maintain and keep track of the data and the values in our program a lot better. And they also give us the advantage of only having to assign a value once. So I can assign a value once up here, and then I can use it and refer to it at different places down here. I can also modify those values at different places in the program. So in this tutorial, we talked about storing values as strings of text and as integers, which are whole numbers. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you guys all of the different types of information and the different types of variables that we can create in our programs. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about the different data types in C++. Well, a data type basically just means a type of data or a type of information that we can use and work with inside of our C++ programs. So there's all different types of information we can store, like text, different types of numbers, decimal numbers, true, false values. all sorts of stuff, and I'm going to kind of walk you guys through what all of those are and how we can use them. So the easiest way for me to demonstrate this is just going to be to create a bunch of different variables. So any of the different types of data that we can work with in C++, we can actually store inside of variables. So I'm just going to create a couple different variables, and I'll kind of show you guys exactly how this is going to work. So the first data type I want to talk to you guys about is called a character. And a character basically allows us to represent one single character. So the way we can create a character variable is just by saying char, and now I want to give this a name, so let's just call it like grade or something. And whenever we create a character, we're going to use these single quotation marks. So I can store any like regular character that I would want inside of here. So, you know, essentially any character that you can think of, you could store in here, and then we're going to include this semicolon. So that's basically like the character data type. And in addition to just storing one single character, there's going to be a lot of situations where we're going to want to store like more than one. And what we can actually do is use something called a string. And a string is basically just a string of characters. So it's, instead of just being one single character, it's like a bunch of different characters. So this would be like essentially just plain text that we would see in a program. So I could just say string, and we could just call this like phrase. And when I create a string, I can use these double quotation marks. So I can say like Draft Academy or something. And now we're going to be able to store, instead of just one character, a bunch of different characters. So there's different situations where you might want to use either like a char or a string, but for the most part, I think strings are probably a little bit more commonly used than chars. So instead of just plain text, we can also store and work with numbers. So essentially there's two different types of numbers, two basic types of numbers. There's whole numbers, and then there's decimal numbers. Some people will also call those floating point numbers. A whole number is like a counting number. So think like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? They're just whole numbers, solid numbers. There's no decimal points, right? Then we have decimal numbers. So it'd be like 0.5 or 1.267 or 10.11. So basically a number that has a decimal point. When we work with these different numbers, C++ is actually going to distinguish between them. So the first type of number we can work with is an integer. So I can just say int, and this could be like an age or something. So whenever we're creating a number, we can just type out the number. So I could say like, and you'll notice I don't need any quotation marks. I don't need anything special surrounding this. I can just type out the number. In addition to positive numbers, you can also use negative numbers. But anytime we're using an integer, you can't have a decimal. You can't do anything with decimal. So if you want to work with a decimal, you have two basic options. So there's two data types that represent decimal programs. The first is called float, and this basically just stands for like floating point. The second one is called double. Now you'll hear different people talk about these different data types. The main difference is just how many decimal points they can store. So a double can store more decimal points than a float. So if you need a number to be very specific as far as like how many decimal points you can take it to, then you definitely want to use a double. I would say for the most part as a beginner, just only worry about doubles. Floats will be used more in specific circumstances, but you know, as you're just learning the language, really just worry about doubles. So we could just say double like GPA, and I could set this equal to 2.4. Basically, I can make this any decimal number that I want. Keep in mind, you could also do like 2.2. It doesn't have to be like a different number decimal. And again, you can make these negative. That's no problem. So ints are going to be what we're going to use for whole numbers. For the most part, doubles are going to be what we're going to use for decimal numbers. So that covers text and numbers. And just with those two data types, with text, we can use characters and strings, and doubles. You can represent like just about any type of information in this program. But C++ is awesome, so they're actually going to give us another data type, which is called a Boolean. And a Boolean is maybe not as intuitive text and numbers. A Boolean is actually what we would call a true-false value. So when we're writing our programs, we have situations and situations where we want to represent true or false data. And a Boolean is just a special word for true or false. right? So I could say BOOL, and we could create a variable like is male, right? So this variable is male is going to store a true or false value inside of it. This is kind of whether or not someone is male. So in my case, I could say true because I am a male, right? So you'll see how this can kind of come in handy for different things. Like we could say something is true or we could say something is false, and that allows us to represent a certain type of information. I could also say false over here, and it's going to be the opposite. So these are going to come in handy a lot, these true, false values, and we can use booleans to represent them. So for the most part, these are the basic data types. Now there's a couple other data types that we could also get into, but I think 99% of the time as a beginner, as somebody who's learning C++, you know, don't concern yourself with anything that you don't have to. So booleans, doubles, which are just decimal numbers, ints, which are whole numbers, strings, which is plain text, and chars, which are just single characters. That's what we're going to be working with. So as we go forward in the course, we're going to be working with all this different type of information. Now, I want to point out one more thing. I'm actually just going to make a little statement here. And, you know, this is the basic statement. So if I wanted to, I could print out any one of these variables. Like if I could print out grade, for example, and this is going to go ahead and print that out onto the screen. You see over here, we're just printing out grade. But we don't have to store this information inside of variables. So if I wanted, I could just type in a string down here, right? I don't have to store it in a variable, and this is what we would call a constant. So I don't need to store it inside of a variable. I could also, you know, type out like false, or I could type out a number like 4.5, or I could type out an integer, or I could type out a character. Like, you don't have to put these things inside of variables. A lot of times you can just use like straight up like that. And this is what we would call a constant. But a lot of times you're going to want to store information in variables because it's really useful. And obviously when you do that, you have to declare the data type, and you have to tell C++ what type of data you want to work with. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about the ins and outs of working with strings in C++. Now in the C++ programming language, one of the most common types of data that you're going to be working with are going to be strings. Strings are basically just plain text. So any type of plain text that you want to represent or work with in our program is going to be considered a string. So down here, you'll see I have this little program set up, basically just printing out a couple lines. So the way I can create a string is just by using an open and closed quotation marks like this. So I can basically type out whatever I want. If I wanted to, I could type out
Sorry.
Academy. You'll see now I'm printing out Draft Academy and Hello. If I was to run my program, you'll see that we print out Draft Academy and Hello. First thing I want to show you guys is has to do with this cout line of code over here. So you'll notice here it says end L right here. Basically, when we put end L right there, it tells C++ that we want to print a new line after we print whatever is in here. So if I was to get rid of this and I just said cout Draft Academy, now what you'll see is that hello is going to get printed on the same line as Draft Academy because we didn't put end L, so we didn't put a new line. If I wanted to, though, I could actually manually come in here and specify a new line by saying \n. So \n basically means that we want to print out a new line. So this, inside of a string, represents the new line character. So now when I run this program, you'll see that hello gets printed out on a new line. So that's how we can use that \n inside of our string in order to do essentially the same thing as L is doing. And if I wanted, I could put this like in between these two words and it would put them on a new line. So in addition to just printing out a string like we did over here, I could also store a string inside of a variable. So in order to create a string variable, I can just say string, we'll give it a name, so we can just call this phrase, and I can set it equal to whatever I want. So let's set it equal to Draft Academy. And then I can do exactly what I did down here. So here I can just print out phrase, and now it'll be printing out Draft Academy onto the screen. So in addition to just printing out strings and kind of working with them that way, storing them inside of variables, you can also use what's called a function. Now, a function is something that we're going to get into more later in the course. We're going to write our own functions. But for now, just know that a function is basically like a little block of code that we can call, which will perform a specific task for us. So these functions do all sorts of things, and there's a lot of functions that we can use with these strings, and they're called string functions. So these functions will either modify the string, or they'll give us information about the string. So I'm going to show you guys a couple. So the first string function that I want to show you guys is the length function. And all I have to do to use this is I can just come down here, and I'm actually just going to print out the result of using these functions. So I'm going to put it down here. I can just say phrase.length, and I can make an open and close parentheses. And generally, when we're calling a function in C, we're going to use this dot, and then we're going to type the name of the function. So this is the length function, and we're going to make an open and close parentheses like that. So now, if I was to run this program, you see we're getting 50. So this is basically just telling us how many characters are inside of this phrase string. How many characters are inside of it. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually access individual characters inside of here. So let's say that I wanted to access just this G. So I wanted to print out the first character in this string. Well, I can make an open and close square brackets, just like this. And inside of here, I can put a 0. And 0 is going to refer to this first character in the string. So now when I run my program, you'll see we're just printing out this capital G. If I wanted to access this R, for example, I could say 2, and 2 is going to refer to this R. So now when I run my program, we're printing out R, as you can see over here. So if you haven't caught on yet, whenever we're indexing a string, we're starting at 0. So if I was to assign index positions to each one of these characters in the string, I would say that G is at index position 0, I is at index position 1, R is at index position 2, A, 3, F4, etc. So whenever C++ is indexing a string, it always starts indexing it at 0. So it'll start counting basically 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Even though G is the first character in Draft Academy, it's technically at index position 0. So whenever we're using something like this, we're referring to like a specific character, we want to refer to the index position, which is going to start at 0. Another thing I could do is I could actually like modify a specific character in a string. So I could say like phrase, and I can refer to an individual character inside of this string. So you could say like phrase 0. I could assign this a new value. So I can assign this the value of a new character. So you'll notice I'm using these single quotes. So I could say like B, and so now instead of saying GIRAFFE, it's going to say BIRAFFE, because I'm essentially changing one of the characters in this string. So now when we print this out, you'll see it says Giraffe Academy instead of Giraffe Academy. So that can be kind of handy just to modify a specific character inside of a string. We could also find out information about this string. So I showed you guys how we can find out the length of the string, but imagine if we wanted to find out whether or not a specific string or a specific character was inside of this string. I could say phrase.find, and I can make an open and close parentheses. And actually, inside of these open and close parentheses, I'm going to give this find function a couple of different pieces of information. So I'm going to give it some information for it to perform a task with. And these are called parameters. So anytime I give a function different pieces of information, we call it passing parameters, or you also hear people call them arguments. So passing arguments or passing parameters. Basically, it's just information that we give to this function. So this find function, I need to give a couple pieces of information. The first thing I can do is give it a string or a character that I want it to find. So let's say I want it to find academy. So basically, I want to check to see if the word academy is inside of this phrase string up here. The next argument I want to give this, the next parameter, is going to be an integer, and it's going to be the index where I want to start looking. So if I wanted to just check to see if it was in the string, I could say 0. If I wanted to check to see if academy occurred after the third index, then I could say 3. Let's just say 0. So now this is actually going to give us back a number, and it'll tell me at what index position inside of this string academy occurs. So now I'm going to run my program. You'll see over here it's giving us an 8 back. That's because academy starts at index position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So academy starts at index position 8, and that's why it gave that back to us. So I could do this with anything. I could say like FFE or something, and now this will tell me where FFE starts inside of this string. So it starts at index position 4. So that can be pretty useful, and it's a really useful way to figure out if different things or different strings show up in the string you're working with. There's one more string function that I want to show you guys, which is called substring. So it's just phrase.substr, And this is also going to take 2 parameters. So we're going to give this 2 pieces of information. The first piece of information we're going to give this is a starting index. Now, substring allows us to take, just part of this string. So I could specify that I want to take like all the characters after this A, or I could specify that I wanted to take like from index position 1 all the way to the end. Basically, it'll allow me to take like just a subsection of this string. So the first parameter I want to give this is a starting index. So I could say like 8. And so basically, this is going to start grabbing a new string at index position 2. Then I can give this a length. This is basically going to tell substring how many characters I want to grab. So if I said like 3, it's basically going to start at index position 8. So it's going to start up from this A, and it's going to grab 3 characters. So it's going to grab this A, this C, and this A. So now when I print this out, you'll see we get ACA just like that. And that's basically what we do. So this is the starting index and this is the length. And one of the cool things we could do is we could actually take this and store this substring in another string. So I could say like string phrase sub, just like that. And then I could come down here and I could say phrase sub is equal to, and then what we just had before. So phrase.substring. And now if we print it out in phrase sub, it'll print out so I'm essentially storing the value of the substring in so that can be, and that's really the basics of working with strings. I mean, obviously there's certain things that I left out in the just talking about all the different things you can do with strings. But I think that kind of covers the basics. It kind of shows you all the basic things that you can do. We looked at basic functions. We talked about grabbing individual characters. We talked about string indexes. So I think for now, that should be a good introduction into working with strings in C++. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about working with numbers in C. Now, whenever you're writing programs in C, one of the most common types of data that you're going to be dealing with are going to be numbers. So these could be things like whole numbers or decimal numbers. Basically, I'm going to give you guys a full overview of how to work with numbers. We'll talk about the basics. We'll look at how we can use different mathematical functions in order to do different mathematical operations with our numbers. So this is going to be a pretty cool tutorial. Now, down here, I'm just going to talk to you guys about the basics. There's really 2 types of numbers in C that we deal with, whole numbers and decimal numbers. And whole numbers are basically referred to as integers, and decimal numbers can be referred to as 2 things, either floats or doubles. And essentially, the only thing you need to know about that as a beginner is that doubles allow you to store more specific decimal points. So with a double, you could store, potentially more decimal points than you could in a float. And there's more differences, but if you want to get more into that, you can kind of look it up. But the basics of using numbers is you just type them out. So if I wanted to, for example, print out the number 40, you see I have this C out here. I can just type it in and we can print it out, we can work with it. In addition to positive numbers, we could use negative numbers. If I wanted, I can make this a decimal. So really, numbers are very simple. You just kind of type out the number. But we can also do things like math. So for example, I could say like 5 and 7. This is actually going to do this math operation. So this will actually print out the result of 5 plus 7. So you can see we get 12 over here. So we can use addition. We can also use subtraction. We could use division, which is going to be this /, and we could use multiplication, which is going to be this asterisk. So if I was to multiply these 2 numbers, now you'll see over here we get 5. So those are the 4 basic math operations. So that's going to go well. Also, one other thing I want to show you guys, which is called the modulus. The modulus operator will basically give us the remainder of dividing 2 numbers. So if I said like 10, and then I made this percent sign, and actually this is read 10 mod, and then I said 3, we would read this 10 mod 3. What this is going to do is it's going to take 10 divided by 3, and then it's going to give us the remainder. So this modulus operator will give us the remainder. So 10 divided by 3 is going to be 3 with the remainder of 1. So now we should just get 1. And you can see over here we get 1. So sometimes that modulus operator can come in handy. We can also represent order of operations in C. So C is going to adhere to like the normal order of operations, like EEDMS. Please excuse my dear sorry. Basically, like multiplication and division are going to come before addition and subtraction. So if I said, for example, like 4 plus plus 5 times. This is going to do 5 times 10 first. So it's going to be 50 plus 4. But if I wanted to do the addition first, I can just put a parentheses around this. So now it's going to do 5 plus 4, 9. So now we should get... And you can see. So you need to separate order of operations. I mean, it's essentially just following basic order of operation rules. But you could represent those. So in addition to doing all that stuff, and printing out numbers, we can store numbers inside of variables. So I can make an int, we'll just call it like WNum for full number, and we'll just make this 5. I can also use like double, and this will be like PNum for decimal number, and this would be like 5. Now we're storing these numbers inside of variables. And if I wanted, I could just, you know, print them out like we did here. I want to show you guys one cool thing we can do though, which is incrementing a number that's stored in a variable. So I could say like WNum, and I could say plus plus, and what this is going to do is it's going to add 1 onto WNum. So now when we print out WNum, instead of just being 5, it's going to be 6 because we're adding 1 to it. So you can see we get 6. And that's a shorthand. That'll come in handy a lot. There's a lot of situations where you want to increment a value. You could also do like minus minus, and that will subtract 1 from it. You could also do like WNum plus equals, and we could say like 80. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take WNum and it's going to add 80 to it. So now we should get 5. And you see we do. You can do plus equals, multiplication equals, minus equals. I think you can do division equals. And all of that.
Zu leise, habe ich dich noch maximal?
So you don't have to type out all that stuff. So
Warte mal, sag noch mal was.
Looked at all the different operators. Let's talk about how decimal numbers
Sag mal was.
and integers work together. So
Hallo?
here's a little experiment. Let's say I came down here and I added 5.5 plus 9. So I'm adding a decimal number, and I'm adding it to
hallo, da bist du ja.
integer number, right? So let's see what happens. Over here, you'll see that we're going to get a decimal
Ja, bin grad live.
back. So anytime we're doing math between a decimal number, like a double or a float, and an integer,
Du kannst mal in jeden von den 3 Streams reinkommen und
always going to give us the decimal
reposten.
But it's
Oder
important
so.
to note that if I did math with 2 integers, so for example, let me show you guys, if I was to say like
Ich habe heute mehrere Posts gemacht. Davon sind ein paar gute dabei.
integers, keep in mind, I'm actually going to get an integer
Da kann ich auch
number.
gleich leiden.
So we're going to get like 3 back because that's technically the answer. But here's the thing, this isn't actually the answer. Really what it is it's 3 with a remainder of 1. But because we did the math with 2 integers, we're going to get
Let's speak
an
English,
integer
bro.
value back. If I
Yeah,
was
okay.
to make one of these a decimal number, or even if I made both of them a decimal number, now we're going to get back the actual like full answer. So it's going to be 3 with 3 repeated, just like that. So you can see if we do math between just 2 integers, we're always getting an integer back, even if that's not like fully the correct answer. In different circumstances, you're going to want to do that. In other circumstances, you're not. But just keep that in mind. So that's kind of how integers and decimal numbers interact with each other. So now what I want to do is show you guys how we can use different math operations. So it generally just with math, there's all sorts of different, operations. So you could do like square root, you could take a number to a power, we could round a number. And in C, there's actually these things called functions which can do all that stuff for us. A function is basically just a collection of code that we can call that will perform a specific task. And we're going to talk more about functions later. But for now, I'm going to show you some basic math functions that we can use. A collection of functions which can do all that stuff for us. A function is basically just a collection of code that we can call that will perform a specific task. And we're going to talk more about functions later. But for now, I'm going to show you some basic math functions that we can use. In order to use these math functions, I actually have to do something called importing them. And essentially when we import something, we're basically we're telling C++ that we need to go out and grab code from other files. So up here you can see we're using this include statement and we're grabbing something called IOStream.
Yo, before you go like the shorts, can you go on the stream first on YouTube?
This guy up here. I'll make an open and closed greater than less than sign, and in here I just want to type in C. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to tell our C++ program that we want to use some math functions. That's kind of all you need to know at this point.
Yeah, just type a W in chat.
Put this up here in order to
In all
follow
chats.
along with what I'm going to be doing. So down here, we can now use a bunch of different math functions, essentially just math operations. So for example, I could say like POW, and what this will do is it'll take 2 arguments. So in here I could pass 2 numbers, like I could pass a 2 and I could pass a 5. And what this will do is it'll take 2 raised to the power of 5, and it's just going to print that out. So when I run my program, see we're getting 32. 32 is 2 raised to the 5th power. And you can kind of do that with any number. So I could also say like 3 raised to the 3rd power, so 3 cubed.
So yeah, I was basically just chilling all day,
So
not doing much.
that POW function can be pretty useful. There's another one, square root, SQRT, essentially doing the opposite. So we could say like square root 36, and now this
And
is
I
gonna
collected a
square
lot
root
of
36.
energy basically, so I can stay
So
up
that can be
late
pretty
and
useful. And
stream
inside of
for long
these,
now. But you're
functions,
gonna
you
stay
can
up
put
long
decimal
too, I
numbers
guess.
too. So I can put both integers like whole
See.
numbers and also decimal numbers. There's another one which is called round, which is gonna round a number. So if I put like
So you
4.1
slept the entire day,
here,
when you
this
say
will
you're still
return
going to sleep
the
early.
rounded number.
That's
So you
crazy.
see we just get 4, and this will follow normal rounding rules. So if I change this to
Good, we don't have it right now.
4.6,
You
now
keep
we
cutting
should
out
get
because you're too quiet, bro.
there's a couple other of these
Okay.
functions which will similarly like round decimal numbers. I could say CEIL, and what this will do is it'll automatically just round the number up. So even if this was like 4.1, this will round the number up to the next highest whole number. So you'll see here we get 5. You could do the opposite, which is floor. So if I could just say floor here, if I put a 4.8 in here, normally it's supposed to round up, but now it's going to round down because we're using that CO, or that floor function. So those can be pretty useful. And there's one more I want to show you guys, which is called fmax. And fmax is going to take 2 numbers, so I can pass in like a 3 and a 10. And this will tell me which one's bigger. So this will return back to us the bigger of the 2 numbers. So now when I run this program, you'll see it's giving us 10 back because 10 was the bigger number. And a lot of circumstances in C, you're going to have 2 numbers. You might not know which one is bigger, so this can be really useful to tell us. And you could also use fmin, which will do the opposite. So this will tell us what the smallest number we passed in was. And you can see we get 4 over here. So those are some basic math functions. There's a lot more. If you just go online and search C++ math functions, you'll find a huge listing of all of them that you can use. There's things to do like sine, cosine, tangent. You can do like logarithmic stuff. You can use like exponentials, all different stuff like that. It can be really useful, but that's kind of the basics of how you can use that. And really numbers are extremely useful, and that's kind of been like a broad overview of sort of all the stuff you can do with them. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to get input from a user in C++. Now, a lot of times in our programs, we're going to be working with all different types of information. But one of the most important types of information is going to be information that the user input. So a lot of times in our programs, we're going to want to allow the user to input information, and then we're going to want to use that information in order to do different things. So in this tutorial, we'll just give a broad overview of how that's done. We'll talk
Is it not
about how to get
possible
different types of information.
to do a push-up here?
And you'll kind of learn everything you need to learn. So
Bro,
down
not
here,
so early.
whenever we're getting information from the user, the first thing we always want to do is store that information somewhere. So whenever I'm asking the user to give me a piece of information, if they give me that information and I don't put it anywhere, like it's kind of useless, right? So usually what we want to do is create a variable. And I'm actually going to write a little program that will allow the user to enter in their age. So I'm going to create an integer called age. And I'm not
Oh,
gonna
it
give
stays
a value,
open, so it
but
doesn't
it's
push you
semicolon
up.
there,
Ah,
we're
okay,
essentially
okay.
declaring the integer. So we're
I was
telling
seeing if there's a
C++
skip where you
is
can
what the
launch
user
yourself
can do,
up
but
in
we're
this.
not giving it a
Yeah.
value. We're going to let the user give this variable a value. The next thing I want to do is I want to prompt the user to enter in something, right? So if I don't give them a prompt, if I don't tell them what information I want, then they're not going to know what they should input. So I'm just going to say cout, and I'll just print out a little prompt. So we'll just say enter your age, and we're basically just prompting them to enter in their age. All right, so once we've created the variable and once we've prompted them to enter in the information, now what we can do is we can actually get the information from them. So the way that we get information is actually the opposite of the way that we print out information. So instead of saying cout, I'm just going to say cin. And I'm going to make 2 greater than something. So when we use out, we use these less than
But I
signs.
didn't get the
When we use
chest.
C in, we use greater than signs, and that's really important. So over here, I'm just gonna type in the name of the variable that
I
want
can't
to
go back
store
for the
what they
chest.
enter inside of. So I'm just gonna put age here.
That's
Because I wanna
deactivated now.
store whatever
Oh,
they
okay,
input
I can.
into this age
W
variable.
game design.
So we're assuming that they're gonna enter in an integer number, and I'm gonna store that integer number inside of this integer that we created. Now what we can do is we can just print out something. So we'll print out a little message to them, basically saying like, you are, and then we'll say like age, we can say like years old. Cool. So now we're basically just asking them to enter in their name. We're taking whatever they input and we're storing it inside of this age variable. We can do that using this cin command here, and then we're just printing out you are the age of years old. So let's go ahead and run our program and we'll see how we did. I'm gonna build and run, and you'll see here it says enter your age, so we can just put 30. And now when I click enter, it's gonna take that integer that we entered in, 30, it's gonna store it inside of the age variable. It's gonna print out the prompt. So when I click enter, you'll see it says you are 30. So that's awesome. So we can do that, and we can get an integer. I could also get a double. So if I made this
Dude,
a
the
double,
puzzle was so much easier than I thought. So I just wasted the time trying to do it in another way. Because I couldn't believe it's so easy.
And here they're entering in 4.5. So it's gonna work the same
That's
exact
just
way.
how it
You
goes.
could also do the same thing for
In Zelda, I
characters.
guess.
So if I made this a char,
Sometimes.
here it'll be the same. So we'll be able to get a character from them as well. So now when I run the program, I could just enter in like a G, for example.
Are you watching the stream
Obviously,
too?
that's not the age, but it does the same thing. So it's
Yeah,
able
kind
to
of.
take in that character
What are you
and be
doing?
able to use it.
On the other thing, on the other
Now
side.
here's the thing. That's how we can get characters.
I'm watching
But if we want
some
to get
random
a
videos
string
on
of text, we're
the
actually
other
gonna do something different.
monitor.
So if I want
Okay.
to get a string, I'm actually not going to use this C.
What I haven't done yet
So I'm gonna show
is
you guys how we can get a string.
I was gonna
Instead
see
of
if there's
entering
like an
any age, why don't we
alternative
have
to
them enter in
YouTube.
their name? So over
Like the
here, I'm
most
gonna make a
successful
string.
alternatives to
Call it
YouTube right now and just
name.
upload all my stuff
Instead
there
of
too.
using cin, I'm going to use another command, which is
I mean,
called
would be an option.
getLine. And getLine will basically allow us to get an entire line.
I mean, that will
of
also
text.
just
So
help
instead of
me
just
being
getting, like,
shown
one
on
number,
Google
one
search, you
character,
know?
we're going to get like the entire line.
So that will already indirectly be worth it, even if the site
And cin is basically just
isn't
that
really
little, like, command
that
prompt.
successful.
So, like, whenever we enter
It's worth a
stuff into
try.
the command prompt, that's basically what this
I
is
guess.
saying. And then
Why
we're
not?
going to enter in the name of the variable where we want to store the line of text that we get. So I'm just going to store it inside the name.
You wanna see my map right
So
now?
over here,
So what we just did is we did this tower here,
and
did a shrine, sold a lot of
so now we'll
things,
be able to
and just
get
went
the
exploring.
name from the
Yeah, we
user.
really
So we'll
just went
basically get
a
the
lot of
entire line.
exploring and
So,
collecting
for example,
items
I
and
can come
then
over here, I can
selling
say, like,
all the
John
monster
Smith. And now when I
loot
click enter, it
in the
says,
stream.
"Hello,
It was
John Smith." So that's how we
relaxing
can get,
and chill,
strings
I
of
guess.
text. And that's
So,
really the difference.
good
is
times.
If I wanted to get like an integer and store it inside of an integer variable, or if I wanted to get a char and store it inside of a char variable, I have to use cin. But if I want to just get like a string of text, then I can use this getLine function, and they're both going to be useful. So that's kind of an overview of how we can get input from the user, and you can get as many values as you want. So you could essentially like copy this whole line, paste it a bunch of times below them, and get a bunch of different pieces of information and use them. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to build a basic calculator in C++. Essentially, we're going to build a calculator where the user can enter in two numbers, and then we'll add those numbers together and we'll spit out the answer. So this is going to be kind of cool. And it'll show you guys a little bit more about getting input from users. So down here, the first thing we want to do before we do anything is create two variables where we can store the two numbers that we want to add together. So I'm going to create an integer, and I'm just going to call it num1, and I'm not going to give this a value because we're actually going to let the user give this variable a value. I'm going to create another one called num2, and same thing. And actually, let me show you guys something cool we could do. If we're creating two variables like this, and they're the same data type, I could actually put them on the same line. So I could say num1, comma, num2. And a lot of people find this to be really useful. So, for example, I could do like as many as I wanted. In our case, we're just going to have two numbers though. So now that we've declared our two number variables, the next thing we want to do is prompt the user and get some information. So I'm going to say cout, and the first thing we'll do is prompt them for the first number. So I'll say enter first number, and now we want to actually get the first number from the user. So I'm going to say cin, and over here I'm just going to specify num1. So we're going to store the number that they enter inside of this num1 variable. I can actually just copy this, and we're going to do the same thing down here. So I'm just going to say enter second number, and now instead of num1 it's going to be num2. So at this point in our program we should have both of those numbers. We should have gotten both of those numbers from the user. The last thing we want to do is just print out the answers. So we can actually just say cout, and I'm just going to add num1 and num2 together. So we should be printing out the result of adding those two numbers together. So let's go ahead and run this program and see how we did. So I'm going to build and run. And actually, whoops, I put the wrong direction for these arrows. So this is probably a really common mistake. With cin, we want to make two greater than signs, not two less than signs. So that's something that can easily trip up a new user. And it tripped me up. So when we're using cin, we're using these two greater than signs. When we're using cout, we're using these two less than signs. That's my mistake, but I guess that does kind of highlight a common mistake for beginners in C++, and even for someone like me who's programmed in C++ a lot before. All right, so now let's run our program, and it says enter first number, so we'll enter in 5, second number, 10. And now when I click enter, it should add both these numbers together. So that's pretty cool. Another thing we could do is, instead of using integers, we could also use doubles, and that's as easy as just changing these. So now with the program, so I could enter in like 4, I could also enter in like a 9 pointer. Now we'll be able to add that. So that's kind of cool. And really that's a basic calculator. So essentially we're declaring the variables, we're using cout, and with cout, remember we're using these less than signs. Then we're using cin with the greater than sign. This is basically getting the user, and it's storing it inside of this variable. We're doing that twice, and because we stored these as doubles or before integers, we're able to add them together and print out the answer. So that is the basics of building a calculator. Actually, later in the course, I'm going to show you guys.
Are you excited too about all the stuff coming? It was announced yesterday.
User will get to decide.
Yeah,
In
of
order
course.
to build something like that, we're gonna have to learn some more stuff.
There's also like a Backrooms film that got announced.
Already what? No, it didn't get announced. It released already a few weeks ago, and I watched it already.
Okay. Well, I just saw the trailer today, as an ad.
Wow, bro, it's been out for like a month already in cinemas.
And then all those words get taken
Oh.
and
Well,
into a story. And generally, since you entered in
the
random,
pirate one,
the
right?
story ends up being pretty funny. So let me show you guys over here on my browser. I see an example of a Mad Lib.
So
Essentially,
yeah,
there's
it's
a
not so
story, and then you
bad,
sprinkle
but
those random words that the person enters into the story. So we're gonna build something like this in our C++
I don't know.
program.
I mean, it's not bad for a cinema, but like for a movie, but like I rather have had a movie that's like double the length and more scary. That would have been perfect for me, but you can't have everything.
Saying roses are red, why don't
It's
we
good
let the
enough.
user enter in a color? Instead of saying violets are blue, we'll let them enter in a plural noun. And instead of saying I love you, let's say I
Oh,
love
how do I get up there?
celebrity. So some random celebrity they can enter in. So basically, we're going to ask the user to enter in all these different values. We'll store them in variables, and then we can print them out inside of our story. So let's get started. This should be kind of cool. The first thing we want to do is actually create variables for all of these things. So I'm just going to say string, and we'll create a variable for the color,
Oh, yeah, it's easy now.
the plural noun, and for celebrity.
Bro, this
So
is
now we've
free, what the hell?
variables, but we need to give them values, and we're actually going to let the user give them values when they enter in all those things. The first thing we want to do when we want to get input from the user is we're just going to say cout, and we're going to print out a prompt. So I'm basically just going to say enter a color, so we're going to have them enter in a color. Now we want to actually get the color.
Are you hyped
input.
to
So I'm just
continue
gonna
learning
say
C++? I mean, Maybe
And
not
here we're
today,
just gonna
but in
say
general,
C
are you hyped to get good in
That's
C++?
basically just standing for, like,
So you
the
have
console
more
input, so
opportunities
whenever we,
to become
input text into
self-employed,
the console.
theoretically.
So it's gonna get whatever gets inputted into there.
I mean,
And
kind of.
then we're gonna store it inside
Okay,
of this
good.
color variable. So this will get the line of text that they enter. And I'm actually just gonna copy this, and we'll do the same thing for all the other values. So we're gonna say enter a plural noun, and
While
we'll store
playing
that
and
inside of
streaming on
the
3 platforms,
plural
I'm
noun
having
variable.
a C++
And then down
learning
here, we're gonna do
podcast
the
in the
same
background,
thing
bro.
for the celebrity, so we'll store that in the celebrity variable.
Unfortunately,
Alright,
none of
so
the
we're
usual
declaring the variables, we're printing out our
checked out the
prompts,
stream
and then we're
today.
getting the input from the user using this getLine
So yeah.
function.
It's not
Last
that
thing we
they
need to do
disliked the
is
stream and then clicked
modify
off,
this
it's
part
that
of the control. So
nobody
instead of saying
even
roses
checked it
are
out
color,
because we got unlucky
we're
algorithm
actually
today.
gonna put the
But that's
color
fine,
that
bro.
they entered
Maybe
into
they
the
are all gonna
story.
come out of
Same
nowhere
thing for
soon
this plural noun.
and chill with
So
us.
I'm just gonna say
Yeah, maybe.
plural noun, and you can see how that
Just
gets
gotta keep
placed in
grinding.
between these less thans. And then I love celebrity. We're gonna actually put in the celebrity variable. Cool. Alright, so now our program should be set up. Everything's wired up. We're getting values into all these variables, and we're printing them out down here in our story. So let's run this program, and we should be able to play our Mad Libs.
So yeah, the
Enter a
Backrooms
color,
movie ended
enter in
like
magenta.
basically very
Enter a plural
openly
noun, let's do
with no
wave.
final
And enter
solution.
a celebrity. Why don't we do Tom Hanks? So now when I click
And
enter, all of
it
the
just
values
keeps
are
you
gonna
hungry
show
for
up in
more.
our story.
Bro, the
So
movie
like
is
Rose and
designed
magenta,
exactly
microwave blue,
to get people
love
to watch more Backrooms video after watching the
So our Mad
movie.
Lib worked,
You know what
and
I'm saying?
we are ready to
It's
go.
like a trailer to
So
get
that's
him
essentially
addicted
how
to
you
more
use the
YouTube
Mad Lib.
Backrooms
It's
videos.
as easy
You
as
know?
getting different inputs from the user
Yeah,
and
either that
printing
or
out inside
they're
the
just
story.
gonna make a part 2.
This is a very simple Mad Lib. I mean,
No,
so you guys can
because
see that
basically
you have
all
to
of the
use
characters
like
died in the
20
end.
words and print them out into some huge long story.
Yeah.
And it's gonna work out the same way.
Yeah,
So
maybe
this is
some
an awesome
random
way
new people
to
show up.
create our Mad Libs. In this tutorial, I'm gonna talk to you guys about using arrays in
And
C++.
the interesting parts where they showed different kind of backrooms instead of just the normal parts, they were all just short images basically at the end. So it was like he was only exploring the main level 1 most of the time. And yeah, because it didn't fit in the story, he didn't really go in many other kinds of rooms. And these other kinds of rooms, because they couldn't fit it in the story, they basically just showed the aesthetics of them at the end before the credits, you know?
Oh, what an ending.
Multiple data values. So an array could hold like a list of.
So yeah, the movie was basically designed to get the people more hungry for more.
Put, pieces of information that are related to each other.
Which is smart, I guess.
So I'm going to show you guys how we can create arrays and how we can work with them. You create an array a lot like you create a normal variable. So the first thing we have to do is tell C++ what type of data we want to store inside of the array. So I'm just going to make an array of integers. So I can just say int.
Yeah, also have some good
Again,
news.
just like a variable, we're going to give it some names. So
I mean, this is kind of political, but let's just keep it simple. They, Trump wanted a concert in front of the White House, and basically the band just declined him. So yeah, they got the opportunity to basically get rich and extreme attention by performing in front of the White House, and they said no, we don't wanna.
And I can just make an open and close curly bracket, and inside of here I can just start typing out the information that I want to store. So let's say I want to store like a list of numbers. I could say like 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. Right, so I'm storing all of these numbers inside of this single container. So unlike a variable where we could only store one number, now I'm storing a whole list of numbers. And we would refer to these as elements in the list. So 4 would be the first element in the list, and then we would delineate the next element using this comma. So now we have the second element, 8, 15, 16, etc. So these are all going to be elements inside of our array. Now, down here, I'm going to show you guys how we can access individual elements. So I'm just going to say cout And let's say that I wanted to access one of these particular elements. Let's say I wanted to access like this first element here inside the array. Because what good is the array if we can't access the information?
Yeah, I also
can just
updated
say
the emulator
lucky
again,
nums, and I can
so
make an open
the
close square
newest
bracket.
beta
Now,
version.
inside of this
So
open
basically
close
he
square
made
bracket, I
3
can put the
new beta
index
versions in
of the
3
element
days,
inside the array that I
and
want to
then
access.
hasn't
So
done
if I want to
anything
access
since
this first element in the
6
array,
days.
I just need to put its index in here.
So
That's
yeah.
going to be 0. So now when I run my
Be something.
program, you'll see we're printing out 4. We're
And
printing
there's
out
not
that
really
first
patch
element
notes
in
for the
the array.
beta versions,
If I wanted to get access to this 15, it's going to be 0.
but I feel like this
2.
is running
It's gonna be
slightly
index
smoother,
2
which
inside of
might
this array.
be
So now when I run my program, we get that
placebo,
15.
but I don't think it's
If you haven't
placebo. I
caught
think
on
it
by
might be
now,
actually a bit
when we
smoother.
index these arrays, we start with index position 0. So I would say that 4 is at index position 0, 8 is at index position 1, 15 is at index position 2, 16, 3, etc. So we would always say that the first element in the array is actually at index position 0. And if you're familiar with how strings are indexed in C++, it's the same exact thing. So that's how we can access an individual element in the array. We can also modify an element in the array. So I could say like lucky nums. Like let's say I wanted to change the first element. I could say lucky nums 0 and I could give this a different value. So I could set this equal to 19, for example. Now down here, when I print out lucky nums 0, I'm actually going to be printing out, and actually, typo, whoops. I'm actually going to be printing out 19. So you can see we're able to modify one of the indexes inside of that array. Another thing we can do with these arrays is I can give them a size. So normally if I just create the array like this, where I just say int lucky nums in an empty square brackets, the array is only going to be able to store the elements that I declare over here. But a lot of times when you're making these arrays, you might not know what all the elements should be. So over here I could put in a number, like I could say like 20. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm telling C++ that I want to be able to store 20 elements inside of this lucky nums array. So over here I don't have elements yet, I only have elements 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what I could actually do is I could add more elements into here. So I could say like lucky nums 6 or lucky nums 10, and I could give this a value. So I could give lucky nums 10 the value of 100. And now down here, if we printed out lucky nums 10,
Oh wow.
you can see. The other thing you can do is just not give this any info right up front. So I can get rid of all of these, and I can just put a semicolon here. And then down here, I can give all these different values. So I could say lucky nums 0 is equal to 100. And now I could, essentially just assign all the elements after we declare it. So like I said, a lot of times you might not know exactly what's going to go in the array when you declare it. And so you can just basically tell C how many items you want to hold in there, and then you can just fill the array up as you go. That's really the basics of arrays, and arrays are very simple. So this is a very simple way to store multiple pieces of information. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about using functions in C++. A function is basically just a little collection of code that performs a specific task. So a lot of times in C++, when you're writing a bunch of code out, you have code that's designed to do a certain thing. So you might have like 4 or 5 lines of code that's supposed to do something. And a function is basically a container where you can put that code and then you can reuse it throughout your entire program. So I'm going to show you guys how we can create a function in this tutorial. So down here in my program, you'll see I have this little block of code here. It says int main, there's an open and closed parentheses, and then there's these open and closed curly brackets.
Are you hyped for when I
function.
finished the game on stream, and
little
then
block of code,
the streams are
and
gonna be in
this
the
block of code
extra
performs a
hardcore
specific
mod
task.
that's made by the
And the purpose
community?
of this main
Because the
function
normal
is
hard
it's the
mod isn't
function
even
that
enough,
gets
so it's gonna be
executed
like
when we run
more
our
content.
program.
It's
So,
gonna be
any code
more
that we
interesting.
put inside of this main function is going to get executed when our program.
W.
You wanna
I'll show you
play
guys how we can
Breath of the
create
Wild as well?
functions. Up here above
Yeah,
this
after I
main
finish
function,
TOTK,
I'm gonna create another
we're gonna
function.
go master
The
mode
task that this
in
function will be performing is it's going to say hi to the user.
Breath of the Wild,
So
but
whenever
with
we're
extra
creating
hard
a
mod.
function in C++ we need to give
Alright.
C++ a couple pieces of information. The first piece of information we need to give is called a return type. Now, whenever we create these functions, a lot of times the functions will go off, they'll perform a specific task, and then they'll return a value back to the caller. And we're actually going to talk more about returns and return types in the next video. But for the purposes of this video, you can kind of just follow along. And I'm just going to go ahead and put void here. And when we put void here, it basically means that this function is not going to return anything. So this is kind of like the most basic type of function. And after we put void, now we need to give this function a name. Remember, a function is a block of code that performs a task. So generally, when we're naming a function, you're going to want to name it according to the task that it's performing, or according to the purpose of the function. So I'm just going to call mine say hi, because our function is going to say hi to the user. Now I'm going to make an open and closed parentheses, and after this I'm going to make an open and closed curly bracket.
I also heard Microsoft admitted that their AI spendings are too inefficient and that they're gonna scale it down. But they've said that before, and then they didn't really do it, and now they announced it so again, so I don't know what to believe anymore.
I mean, I don't mind Microsoft losing more money, but okay.
A dozen lines or 100 lines if I wanted to. You can put as many lines of code in the function as you want. Now, let's run our program and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and run our program. And you'll see over here, nothing's getting printed out. So, hello user isn't actually getting printed out on our program. Here's the problem. When we want to execute the code that's inside of these functions, in other words, when we want to execute a function, we have to do something called calling it. So if I want this code inside of here to be executed, I have to call the function. Now remember, the code inside this main function gets executed by default, right? So no matter what, this is going to get executed. So inside of here,
So you have all streams open right now?
The say hi function. I can just type
Yeah, I think so.
say hi.
Great.
And I can type an open and close parentheses. And when I do this, when I type
No,
this
TikTok.
out, this tells C++ that I want to execute.
Does that one even work? When I checked it,
inside of this
it didn't
say
show
hi
that
function. So
you're
when
live.
C++ sees this, it's
I
gonna
think.
jump up to this
But I
say hi
am.
function,
Then you didn't
it's
check
gonna
correctly.
execute
Can
all
you
the
check
code
again?
inside of there, and then it's going to come back down. So let's go ahead and run our program, and we'll see what happens. So you can
Oh, no.
see over here now.
No, it shows up.
Hello user.
Okay, so you're gonna double tap for likes, and then
So if I said, like, see out
you can
over
go
here,
on
and I
share,
said
copy
top,
link, repost,
and
and
then
put in
same
story.
thing over here, and I said
That would be great.
bottom. When I run my program, you'll see that we're printing out top, hello user, and then bottom. And actually, this probably would have been better if I put new lines in there. But the point is that when this program executes, C++ is going to execute this line of code. It's going to see that we want to call the say hi function, and it's actually going to leave this main function. It's going to jump up here to the say hi function. It'll execute all of the code inside of here. Then when it runs out of code to execute inside of the say hi function, it's going to jump back to the main function and execute this line. So that's basically like the flow of what's happening. So this is a very basic function, but we can make this more complex. And one thing you can do with these functions is you can actually give them information called parameters. So this say hi function, I could give this a piece of information, and the say hi function could use that piece of information to, perform its task differently or better or whatever. So these are called parameters, and if I want to specify that this say hi function should be given a piece of information, I can just come over here and specify what piece of information it should take. So in our case, instead of saying hello user, why don't we say hello to someone else? So up here I could say like string name, and now this function's going to accept one parameter, a name. And down here, instead of saying hello user, we can just say hello name. Now, whenever I call this say hi function now, because it's specifying that it needs to take a parameter, I need to pass it a parameter. I need to pass it a value. So in here, I can just pass it like Mike. And now, it's going to print out hello Mike, because the value Mike is going to get stored inside of this main variable. Alright, let's go ahead and run our program. And now you'll see it's printing out hello Mike. So that's kind of cool. And you can take any piece of information as a parameter, and you can also take multiple parameters. So why don't we specify another parameter like age? So now the caller is going to have to pass in their name and their age. So now we can say hello name. We'll say like you are, and then we'll just say how old they are. So we'll say like age. So now we're passing in 2 pieces of information inside of this function. And down here, when I call the function, I have to give it 2 pieces of information. So now I could just say like Mike, and let's say that I'm 60. So now when we call this function, it's going to be able to take in both of those pieces of information and use them to perform the task differently. And what's cool about these functions is I can call this as many times as I want. In other words, I can reuse all of the code that's up here. So I could come down here, I could copy this, and why don't we do this a bunch? So we'll say like Tom is going to be 45, and say Steve is going to be 19. So now I'm actually going to run this code 3 different times. And actually over here I'm just going to put a end line so that gets printed out on new lines. Alright, let's run the program, and you'll see it says, hello Mike, you're 60, Tom's 45, and Steve's 19. So functions are great because we can reuse the code that we write inside the function. So basically, like, I wrote this function one time, and I can reuse it as many times as I want inside of my program. So anytime you have code that's going to be reused a lot, that's a good candidate for a function. All right, so I want to show you guys one more thing. You'll notice that I'm creating this function up here above my main function.
No?
But if I was to take this and move it down here, so for example, if I move it below the main function, now when I run my program, we're going to get an error. You can see we're getting a little red block here. This is the problem. When we create this function below the main function, it doesn't actually know about it. So like all this code up here is getting executed. So C++ is trying to execute the say hi function, but it has no idea like what that is because we created it down here. So what we can do is we can actually create what's called a function stub. So up here, we're basically just going to write out the function's signature, and we're going to tell C++. So you guys remember, like, if I created a variable, like if I created an int and we just called it num, I don't have to give this a value right away. I could then come down here and say num is equal to 4. This is basically what we're going to do with this function. We're going to essentially just declare the function, and then somewhere else in our program we can define it. So over here I'm just going to say void say hi, and it needs a string name and it needs an int age. So now when I create this little function stub up here, or this function signature, I'm basically declaring the function, and I can give it a value down here. And now C++ is going to be able to call it because it's going to have some information about it. So when I run my program now, we're able to call it no problem. So that's kind of just how we can do that with functions. And really, you can create as many functions as you want. In fact, a good program will have lots of functions. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how we can actually get information back from functions using the In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about returns in C++. So when I'm talking about returns, I'm talking about return functions. So in C++, we can write functions that are basically like little containers that store a bunch of code that performs a specific task. And with those functions, we can call them, and we can also pass them information. So I can give them all sorts of parameters, different information that they can use to perform their task better. But in addition to giving functions information, functions can actually give us back some information. So when I call a function, not only can I give it parameters, but that function can give information back to me. And I'm going to show you guys how we can use this and how we can use the return keyword in C++. So why don't we create a function up here, and I actually want to create a function that's going to cube a number. So when I cube a number, I'm basically taking it. So if I was to say like 2 cubed, it's basically just 2 raised to the 3rd power, or it's just going to be 2 times 2 times 2. Right? That's what cubing a number does. So why don't we create a C++ function that's going to cube a number? Now, when we create a function in C++, the first thing that we have to do is declare something called a return type. And a return type basically tells C++ what type of value or what data type this function is going to return. Now in the last tutorial, if you're following along with the course, we just put void here. Void basically means that our function wasn't going to return any information. information. In this tutorial, though, we definitely want to return some information. So you can put any of the generic C++ types here. You can put like int, double, you can put character, you can put string. Essentially, any of those values can go here. In our case, we're going to see the number, so why don't we just make it a double? And I'm going to say double, and now we need to give this a name, so I'm just going to call it cube. And we're going to take one parameter into this function. So why don't we take a double, and we'll just call it num. Now, inside of this function, all we want to do is cube the number, and then return the result that we get. So I'm actually going to create a double.
Zelda, such a vibe, bro.
This equal to the cubed value of num. So I'm just going to set it equal to num
Hello?
times num
Oops.
times num. So this is basically me cubing.
I mean, the spot where I am right now. Like
Inside of it,
the
result of
pools that
cubing
just regenerate your healing.
down here, I want to return
That's
the
a
value
vibe, you know?
stored inside of the result. So I can just say return
Yo, I guess.
result. And now this is going to tell C++ that
I mean, it's hard to explain, but like the one game where there's actual music too, and then when you go in the pool, there's you heal and stuff. Well, here you just heal without the music, but yeah, you get what I mean.
Cube and we pass it this information, it's actually going to get a value back. So if I wanted, I could basically say like double answer is equal to cube 5.0. And now the value that gets returned back from this cube function is going to get stored inside of this answer variable. So let me show you guys. I can say cout, and I'm just going to print out answer. And so now, when I run my program, what you'll see is we're going to be printing out the result of cubing 5. And you'll see over here we get 125. So 5 times 5 is 25. 25 times 5 is 125. So we were able to cube it. And you can see here, this is getting a value back. So I'm able to store the value that gets returned inside of this variable. If I wanted, I could also cut out the middleman, and I could just print out cube 5.0. So let's just paste this back here. And now it's going to do the same exact thing. So we should get 125. And actually, up here, if we wanted, instead of storing num times num times num inside of this result variable, I could instead just return these guys up here. So we, again, cut out the middleman.
Just a
and we'll just
chest?
return that.
That better be something crazy.
Alright, so there's also one more thing I want to talk to you guys about, which is this return statement, this return keyword right here.
Come on.
This is a very special word in C++. And basically, whenever we type out this return keyword, it's essentially telling C++ that
Really?
we're executing the code inside of this function. So if I was to
Wow.
put like a C out
Okay, I
here,
guess.
and I just printed out like hello, when I run my program now, you'll notice that it's not printing out hello. Even though we're executing that cube function, even though we're executing all that code, it's never printing out hello. That's because whenever we use this return keyword, it's going to break us out of the function. So this line of code is actually never going to get executed because it's never going to get reached. When C++ sees this line, it's just going to break out and we'll head back down to the main method. So that's essentially what this is doing. And that's sort of the basics of using returns. So like I said, if you didn't want to return a double, you could return any type of data, like a string. You can even return something like an array. So really you can return anything you want, and then that value will get stored over here. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about if statements in C++. Now, an if statement is basically a structure that we can use in our code, which will allow our program to respond to different situations. So when one situation occurs, we can do one thing, and when another situation occurs, we can do another thing. Essentially, we're able to check different conditions, and when those conditions are true, we can do certain things, and when those conditions are false, we can do other things. So I'm going to show you guys exactly how this works. Down here in our main function, I'm just going to create a couple different things. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable. It's going to be a Boolean variable. Remember, a Boolean variable stores a true or a false value. So I'm going to create a Boolean called is true. And I'm going to give this a value initially of true. So we're basically creating this variable is male. It's storing whether or not someone is male, and I'm giving it a value of statement, like I said, allows us to respond to different situations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be able to write an if statement that will respond to the situation where the user is a male and the situation where the user is not a male. So what I can do is I can actually say if, I'm going to make an open and close parentheses, and then I'm going to make an open and close curly bracket. Now, inside of this open and close parentheses, I can specify a condition. So I can actually check a condition. And if the condition that I put inside of those open and close parentheses is true, then we're going to execute the code inside of here. If it's false, then we're going to move on. So over here, we're essentially putting a true or a false value. And that's basically a condition, right? It's a true or false value. So I'm going to come down here, I'll say if, and I'm just going to type out is male. And essentially what this is saying is if the value stored inside of is male is true, in other words, if the value in here is true, then we're going to execute the code that's inside of these curly brackets. So I could say like C out, and I'm just going to type out like you are a male. And now when I run my program, you guys will see what happens. So I'm going to run the program, and you'll see over here it says you are a male. And that's because the Boolean is male was true. So the value that was inside of this condition, the value inside of the parentheses was true, and we executed this code. If I made this false, now you'll see that this code isn't going to get executed. So we're not going to be printing anything more. So because the value inside of this parentheses, because the condition was false, we're actually not going to execute this code. But let's say that if the person wasn't male, we also wanted to handle that situation. I can use another keyword in C called else. So I can type out else, just like that. And I'm going to make an open and closed curly bracket. Now, inside of this open and closed curly bracket, I can put a message that's going to be displayed when this is false. So I'm just going to say C out, and I'll say you are not male. Right? So I'm responding to this situation. So now, even though is male is false, when I run my program, it's going to be able to respond to that. So I'm just going to say you are not male. Essentially, what's happening here is my program is now smart enough to respond to this variable. So if this variable is male is true, it can handle that. If it's not true, it can also handle that. So basically, inside of these parentheses, I specified a condition. In our case, it was a true or false value that was stored inside of this is male variable. So that's kind of cool. Now, let's up the ante a little bit. I want to show you guys how we can make these more complex. This is a very simple example, but let's say I added in another Boolean. So I had another Boolean called is tall, and I'm going to set this equal to true. And actually, I'm going to set this equal to true. So now, in addition to is male, I also have is tall. So let's say that we wanted to check to see if the person was both male and if they were tall. So down here, what I can do is I can use something called the AND operator. I could say is male and is tall. Basically what's happening now is C++ is saying if the person is male and
Oh,
the
internet
person is tall,
problems
then
are
we're gonna
coming in
print
a
that.
second.
So
I
I'll just
just
say
got
you
a
are
message.
a tall male.
Okay,
So this
perfect.
code, this line of code down here, and any of the code inside of these open and closed curly brackets is only going to get executed when is male is true and is tall is true. Essentially, this AND operator is allowing me to check two separate conditions. And both of them have to be true in order for this line to get printed out. So you'll see is male is true and is tall is also true. So now, when I run my program, you'll see that it says you are a tall male. Here's the thing though, if I set one of these to false, so if I set is tall to false, this whole condition is no longer going to be true. So then we're going to go down here to this else block, and this should probably say like you are not male or not tall, but we'll just leave it like that just for demonstration purposes. Alright, so now it says you are not male, right? And obviously, like I said, that message should be different. But the point is that this condition was false because one of these values up here was false. And that's how we can use this AND operator. There's another operator called the OR operator, and that is similar to AND, except only one of these conditions has to be true in order for the whole thing to be true. So even though is tall is set to false and is male is set to true, this is still gonna execute. So it's still gonna say you are a tall male because one of them is true. So let's go ahead and run this program now. You'll see it says you are a tall male. So it executed the code that was inside this initial if block. And that's because one of them was true. If I set both of these to false now, because we're using the or, now it's going to go down to you are not male. So you'll see down here it says you are not male. So that's basically how we can use and how we can use or. With the and operator, we can put two conditions in, and both of them have to be true for the whole thing to be true. With the or operator, only one of the conditions has to be true for the whole thing to be true. And they can both be true as well, and it'll be true. But if both of them are false, then it's going to be false. All right, let's make this even more complex, though. So I want to show you guys another thing we can do. I'm going to bring this back to and. So I'm going to say is male and is tall. But let's say that we wanted to check to see if they were male and they weren't tall. So if they were like a short male. Well, I can actually check another condition. So I can use another keyword in C++. It's called else if. And I'm going to make an open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. And I'm just going to bring this down to a new line. So else if is basically saying if this condition up here is false, then we're going to come down here and we're going to execute this condition. So if this condition up here is false, instead of just going to else, we're going to come over here and we're going to check another separate condition. So over here, I want to check to see if they're male and they're not tall. So they're not tall. So I can say is male, just like before. So I'm saying else if is male and is tall. But remember, I want to check to see if they're not tall. And here I want to introduce you guys to another operator. It's called the negation operator. It's basically an exclamation point. And whenever you put this exclamation point before a condition like is tall, it's going to actually negate that entire condition. So if is tall is true and we put this negation operator over here, it's going to set it equal to false and vice versa. So essentially what I'm saying here is else if is male and is not tall. That's basically what this is saying. So now over here we could just print out you are a short male, right? Because if this code, in other words, if this condition is true, that means they're male and they're not tall, so they're a short male. And there's one more that we can check. So I'm going to say another else if over here. And there's one more possible scenario with these two variables up here. That's when they're tall, but they're not male. So I could say not is male and is tall. So this would be like, you know, it could be like a tall female or something, right? So down here, I'm going to go ahead and say C out, and I'll just say you are tall but not male, right? So essentially, I'm just printing that out onto the screen. So now we have all of these different situations covered. So over here in this if-else block, which is what we would call this, and actually down here in this else block, we would want to change this. So this is going to be you are not male and not tall. So that's just, you know, semantically going to be correct. All right, so we're able to respond to every possible combination of these two variables up here. So let's try this out. I'm going to set both of these equal to true. And now I'm going to run my program. So they're both equal to true, so our program will be able to respond to that situation. It says, you are a tall male. Awesome, it was able to respond to that. Let's set is male equal to false. So now we have is male, false, and is tall, true. Our program, once again, is going to be able to handle that. It's going to say, you are tall, but not male. So the program's smart enough now to be able to tell us what we are depending on the value of these variables. Let's try another one. So we set is male to true and is tall to false. It's going to be able to respond, so it'll say you are a short male. And then finally we'll set them both false, and we should get the answer, which is going to be you are not male and not tall, this stuff. So let me walk you guys through this one more time. We have this if statement, and it's checking if they're a male and if they're tall. Now these are both conditions, right? So I'm checking this is male, this is a condition. Essentially it's a true or false value, right? And then I'm checking is tall, and if both of these are true, then we'll execute the code inside of here. If this is false, then we'll come down here and we'll check this other condition. We're going to keep doing that until we get down here and we figure out, okay, they're not male and they're not tall. So that's the basics of if statements, and really this is just scratching the surface of if statements. I talked to you guys about a lot of the different things we can do, but there's one more thing I want to talk to you guys about in the next tutorial, which are called comparisons. And down here we're using these Boolean variables in order to get our conditions, right? So I'm using these, and these are either going to be true or false, right? But we can also use something called comparisons, and with comparisons we can check to see if different values relate to each other in different ways. So I can check to see if like a number is greater than another number or something, and we can use those comparisons as our conditions, and that's gonna be pretty cool. So stick around for the next tutorial and I'll talk to you guys more about these if statements. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys some more about if statements. More specifically, we're going to be looking at using comparisons inside of our if statement conditions. So this should be kind of cool. In this tutorial, I want to create a function. So we're going to write a function, and it's going to basically tell us the max of two numbers. So this function will take as parameters two numbers, and then we'll basically return
kills the stream, and now I just need to start it
great
again.
example of how we can use comparisons.
Okay, perfect.
So over here I have my main function, and up here I'm going to create another function, and let's just say it's going to return an integer, and I'm just going to call it get max, and we'll make an open.
I'm not sure if it killed the YouTube stream too.
Curly bracket. So inside of this function, we're going to take two parameters. One is going to
be YouTube is still up,
and we'll get another integer. So essentially, we're going to take two integers as parameters, as input, and the goal will be to figure out which of the integers.
Okay, only TikTok got killed.
Back to color. First thing I want to do is just create a variable called result, and I'm not going to give this a value right away, but eventually, at the end of this function, we're going to return result. So whatever we do in here, we have to store whichever of these is bigger inside of this result variable. So this should be kind of interesting. Now,
okay, maybe TikTok should be live again in a second if this works.
We can use an if statement to do that. So I'm just going to say if open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. Now, inside of this parentheses, we need to put a condition. In other words, we need to put a true or false value, right? If the value is true, then we'll execute whatever's down here. If the value is false, then we'll just move on. Here's the thing, though. In the last tutorial, when we were learning about if statements, we were using booleans, right? And a boolean is a true or false value. It's really easy. You throw it in there, and it's true or it's false, and you can just kind of do the if statement. But in a lot of cases, we're not going to have any boolean information available to us. So it's not going to be as easy as just like throwing a boolean in there. The only information that we have are these two numbers. So how can we create like a true or a false value using just those two numbers? Well, what we can do is we can use a comparison. So if I want to figure out which of these numbers is bigger, I can just compare them, right? So over here, inside of this if condition, I can basically just say if num1 is greater
Okay, we're back
than
on live TikTok now
num2.
too.
If
You
num1
gotta
is greater
repost the
than
stream
num2,
again.
then we can just set result equal to num1. And the reason I'm doing that is because we know for a fact that
And
this
spam likes.
if this comparison is true, then num1
You gotta spam
is
like
bigger.
100
see
likes for
this
the
comparison,
minimum
num1 greater than
thing.
num2, it's actually going to get resolved down to a true or a false value, right? Num1 is either greater than num2 or it's not. Technically, this is going to be a Boolean value, right? Once you evaluate the comparison, once we figure out if it's true or not, it's going to be a true or false value, right? So I can basically check to see if num1 is greater than num2, and if it is, we'll set result equal to num1, and we can just say else, and we'll set result equal to num2, right? And the reason we're saying this down here is because if this condition's false, if num1 isn't bigger than num2,
Bro,
then we know
gibt's
that
schon die Likes
num2
auf
is bigger
TikTok?
than
Weil da kann man
or
halt so mehrere
in certain
Spams, also du
circumstances,
kannst da
it'll
100 Mal
be
welche geben.
bigger.
Also du
So
musst 100 Mal tippen.
So then down
Und
here,
dann
we're
ist das für
gonna
den Algo erst
return
erfüllt.
the result. So let's go ahead and test this function. I'm just going to come down here, and why don't we print out the answer? So I'm just going to say get max, and we'll throw like a 2 and a 5 in there, right? So pass in a 2 and a 5, and now when we run this program, hopefully we should get that 5 back. So run the program, and yep, over here we get our 5. So that's working perfectly. So this is basically how we can use comparisons inside of these if statement conditions, right? Technically, this comparison is going to get resolved down to a Boolean value. It's going to get resolved down to a true or false. If either the comparison is true or not, right? And that's kind of interesting. So that's sort of the basics. And in addition to using greater than, we could also use less than. We could use less than or equal to. We could use greater than or equal to. We can use equal to, and equal to is a double equal. So when we use the equal sign down here, we're using it for assigning. So I'm assigning the variable result to the value stored inside num1. When I use this double equals, it's a comparison operator. So I'm comparing the value of num1 with the value of num2. And again, that's either going to be true or false, right? They're either going to have the same value or they're not. And then the last one we can use is a not equals. And not equals does exactly what you think it does. This whole thing is going to be true if num1 is not equal to num2. So those are sort of the basics. Now let's make this a little bit more complex. So this getMax function takes 2 integers. What if we had it take 3? So let's say num3. Now all of a sudden, instead of just comparing 2 numbers, we have to figure out which is bigger among the 3 numbers. And this is going to make our if statement a lot more complicated. So why don't we just start over, and I'll show you guys how we can do this. So inside of this comparison, I need to check to see if num1 is bigger than num2, just like we did last time. But I also need to check and see if num1 is bigger than num3. If num1's bigger than num2 and it's bigger than num3, then we know it's the biggest. So let's start there. I'm just going to say if num1, and instead of just saying greater than, I'm going to use a greater than equals, right? Because there is that chance where they're all the same number, in which case this will cover that. So we can say if num1 is greater than or equal to num2.
Oh, you gotta
So
stand
I'm
there.
going to use this AND operator, and this is going to allow me to check another condition. So I can say num1 is greater than or equal to num3. So now, if num1 is greater than or equal to num2, and it's greater than or equal to num3, then we know num1 is the biggest. So I'm going to set result equal to num1. Now, down here, we need to check another condition. So I'm going to say else if, and we basically want to check to see if num2 is greater than or equal to num1, and num2 is greater than or equal to num3. And if this is the case, in other words, we're going to check this condition if this condition up here is false. So if this condition is false, we know that num1's not the biggest, right? But if this condition is true down here, then we know num2's the biggest. So we'll say result is equal to num2. Now, all we have to do is just say else, and down here we can just say result is equal to num3. Because if this condition is false, that means num1's not the biggest. If this condition is also false, that means num2's not the biggest. So, if num1's not the biggest and num2's not the biggest, then num3 must be the biggest. So we're going to default to this value. Alright, so that is the if-else block that we need. And you see I'm using a bunch of different stuff here. So not only am I using this AND operator, I'm also using these comparison operators. And that's what these guys are called. So let's go ahead and test our little function out. So now instead of saying 2 parameters, we need to pass in 3. So I'm going to pass in 2, 5, and 10, and we should get 10 back, which we do. If we wanted, we could test out each of the positions. So, for example, I could test out, we'll make this one the biggest now, the second one, and we'll see if it works, and it does. And we'll make this one the biggest now, and we'll see if it works. And it does, cool. And then also there was that condition where like 2 of them were the same, so let's try this, where 2 of these guys are going to be the same, and we're on the program, and yeah, so it's still going to be able to return 200. So there is our max function, and hopefully this gives you guys a little introduction into using comparisons. Now, we can compare all different types of data, so using these comparison operators, we can compare integers, we can also compare like doubles and floats, and we can compare characters. So you can compare all of those guys just by using all that stuff in there. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to build a 4-function calculator in C++. Now, if you've been following along with this course, you'll know that in the beginning of the course, we created a very simple calculator. And basically, that calculator was able to take in 2 numbers as input, and it added them together and printed out the answer. But in this tutorial, now that we've learned a little bit more in the C++ language, we're going to build a more complex calculator. So this calculator is going to allow the user to enter in two numbers, but it's also going to allow the user to specify which operation they want to perform. So they can specify that they want to add the numbers or multiply the numbers, divide them, multiply them, whatever. So it's essentially going to be a more powerful calculator. So down here, inside of my main function, I want to start writing the code for this. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a few variables. So I want to create a couple variables, and why don't we just create these as ints? You could also make these doubles if you wanted. We'll just call them num1 and num2. And these are going to represent the two numbers that we want to perform the operation on. And then down here, we're also going to want to create a character, and I'm going to call it OP for operator. So we're going to store the two numbers here, and we're going to store the operator here. So it's either going to be plus, minus, division, or multiplication. All right, so now that we've created those two variables, we want to start writing the code to get the input from the user. The first thing that we want to do is print out a prompt. So I'm just going to say cout, and I'll basically just print out enter first number. So we'll prompt them to enter in the first number. And then down here, we're going to use cin. And remember, you want to use these two greater than signs. And we want to store the user's input inside of num1, just like that. Okay, cool. So now that we got num1, I'm actually just going to copy this code. And then down here, we can paste it two more times. So down here, we're going to ask them for the operator. So I'll say enter operator. And we're going to store the operator inside of that OP variable, just like that. And then finally, we're going to enter in the second number, and we'll store it inside of num2. So basically what I'm doing is I'm prompting the user for all of the information that we need. So we're going to get that first number, we're going to get the operator, and then we're going to get the second number. So they'd give me like 5 plus 2 or 6 divided by 7 or something like that. All right, so now that we have all of that information, we have one more thing that we need to do, which is we need to figure out what the user wants to do. Right over here, we have the operator. So ideally, they would have entered in like a plus sign, a minus sign, whatever. But we don't know what exactly they entered in. We have no idea what they were going to enter in. So we need to figure that out. And this is a perfect scenario for an if statement. So I'm going to use an if statement, and I'll show you guys how we can check this. So I'm just going to say if, and we need to put a condition in here. So basically what we want to do is we want to figure out what that operator is. So the first thing I'm going to do is just check to see if the operator is equal to a plus sign, right? So if the operator is equal to a plus sign, then we're basically just going to print out the result of adding the two numbers together. So why don't we come up here, and I'm going to create an integer called result, and then down here we'll set result equal to num1 plus num2. And we know that we want to add them because if this condition is true, then we're going to execute this code. All right, so now let's do an else if, and down here, I basically just want to check to see if it's a minus sign. So I'll say if OP is equal to a minus sign, and if it is equal to a minus sign, then we can do exactly what we did up there, but we can subtract the two numbers. So I'll say num1 minus num2. All right, so we can do the same thing for multiplication and division. So I'm actually just going to copy this else if, and I'll paste it down here. And now we'll say OP is equal to /, that means division. And then one more time, we're going to do this for multiplication. So use this asterisk, and then here we're going to multiply the two numbers. So now we're basically covering all of the operators. So if they enter in a plus sign, we got that covered, minus sign, division sign, and multiplication sign, right? We can cover all of those standard scenarios. But there's always the chance that the user entered in an invalid operator. So instead of entering in one of these, they just entered in some random character. In which case, I'm going to use an else block over here. And this else block is going to get executed whenever none of these conditions are true. So if none of the conditions are true, then we know they entered in an invalid operator. So I'm just going to go ahead and print that out. I'm going to say cout, and we'll just print out invalid operator. All right, so basically by the end of this if block, we should have a value stored inside of result. So down here, we're just going to print it out. So I'll just say cout, and we'll print out result. All right, so let's see if our program works. I'm going to go ahead and run the program. And it says enter first number, so why don't we enter in a 5? Enter operator, let's enter a plus sign, and second number, why don't we do 30? So now when I click enter, hopefully our if statement's gonna execute. We'll be able to figure out which operation I was trying to do, and then we'll be able to perform it correctly. So you see down here, we printed out 35, so it looks like everything worked. So why don't we try a couple other ones? Let's do like 50 divided by 5. So down here we get 10. Yeah, so it looks like that's working. All right, let's check one more thing. Let's check to see if we enter in an invalid operator. So I'm gonna put like a 5. We'll enter the operator. Let's make it like a capital G, and then put a 9 for the second number. And you'll see down here it prints out invalid operator. And then we're also getting this other little printout here. And actually that's just because we didn't give result an initial value. All right, so that's basically our 4-function calculator. You guys can see how we can combine getting input from the user. Then we can use these if statements to basically figure out what the user input, and that can be extremely powerful. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about using switch statements in C++. Now, a switch statement is basically a special type of if statement, which allows us to check one particular value against a bunch of other values. So this is a very special use case when we're trying to compare different things. So I'm going to talk to you guys about what switch statements are, and we'll do an example which will kind of illustrate what they were doing. So in my program, in this tutorial, I actually want to create a little function which is going to be able to convert a number into the day of a week. So basically, if the user passed in a 0 to this function, I'd want to be able to print out like Sunday. Or if the user passed in a 1, I'd want to be able to print out Monday, etc. So I want the function to be able to convert an integer number to a day of the week, just like that. So I'm going to show you guys how we can do this inside of our C++ program. So I'm going to create my function, and we're basically just going to have it return a string. And I'm just going to call it get day of week, just like that. And I'm going to close parentheses, and this is going to take one parameter, which is going to be an integer, and we'll just call it day number. So this is going to be the number of the day of the week, so like 0 through 6, basically. Alright, so inside of our little function now, we need to figure out how we can do this. So depending on the day of the week, in other words, depending on the day num that they give us, we want to be able to return a different value. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to create a variable, and it's just going to be a string, and I'm just going to call it day name. So this will be like, this will end up storing the name of the day that they requested. And then down here at the end of this function, we're going to return it. So I'm just going to say return day name. So now we know what we're going to end up returning. So our goal inside of this function now is to populate this day name variable with the correct day of the week. So let's think about this. I mean, one way that we could build this function is by using an if statement. So I could say like if day num is equal to 0, and if day num is equal to 0, then I can say day name equal to Sunday. So if that works. And then I can just keep doing this for every day of the week. So I could say like else if...
Yo, what are you doing right now?
I have to check to see if day num is equal to something else. So day num is equal to 1.
What exactly?
And then down here we'll do the same exact thing. So we say day name is equal to Monday. Right? I can keep doing
Did
this
you say
for
something?
every single day of the week. Here's the problem though. I'm going to have to do this
watching YouTube?
7 times. Right?
Yeah, what
Potentially
exactly?
8 times if we want to check for an invalid input. So I'm going to have
Videos.
to create 8 of these different if-else structures in order to figure
You only
this out.
said videos?
That is extremely inefficient.
What?
Actually,
Did you only say videos?
perfect circumstance for us to use something called
Watching
a
YouTube.
switch statement.
Some random
The switch
videos.
statement
Oh, yeah,
essentially
random
takes what
cutouts.
we're doing over here with
Okay.
these if-else statements, and it makes it a lot easier. So, one thing I want you guys to notice is in every single one of these conditions, in other words, in every single one of these if conditions, we're checking to see if the same value, day num, is equal to a different value. So in here we're saying day num is equal to 0. Here we're saying day num equal to 1. In the next one it would be
Do you
day num
agree
equal
that hype
to
will come
day
back
num
to
equal
BOTV TOTK
all of
soon?
those conditions are checking to see if day
Especially
num
if I
is equal to
continue.
something else. And when you have a situation like
Especially
that,
then.
perfect candidate for a switch statement. So I'm going to show you guys how we can use a switch statement to make this a lot easier. I'm just going to write out switch and open and close parentheses and an open and close curly bracket. So far it looks a lot like an if statement. Up here in these open and close parentheses, I'm going to put in a value. And we're basically going to put the value in here that we want to compare to all those different values. So in my case, it's going to be day num, right? I'm comparing day num to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., right? Day num is the value that I want to compare to all the different values. Now, inside of this switch statement, I can write cases. And basically, I can say case, and then I can put a value in here, so I can say 0 and a colon, and then down here, I can basically type out what I want to happen. So I could say day name is equal to Sunday. Now, essentially what this is doing is it's saying in the case that day num is equal to 0, we want to set day name equal to Sunday. And then right below here, I'm just going to say break. And I'll explain what break does in a second. But I can basically make one of these cases for every single number. So I could say like case 1. So in the case that day num is equal to 1, I'm going to set day name equal to Monday. And then again, I'm going to say 3. And then I can keep doing this for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Right? So what this break is doing down here, this break statement is essentially breaking.
No, oh, okay, I misclicked. Fuck it, I'm not doing this.
This break statement here, C++ is actually just going to keep looking through all these cases. So even if day num is equal to 0 and it sets it equal to Sunday, it's still going to keep going and checking all these different values unless I say break right here. And generally, it's a good idea to say break unless you want to be able to check for more than one condition. We're basically saying in the case that day num is equal to 0, we're going to do all the code down here. And I'm actually going to make one of these for each day of the week. So I'm going to go off and do that, and then we'll meet back here and kind of show you guys what I have. All right, so I went ahead and made one of these little case blocks for every day of the week. So you can see down here we have 0 through 6. And they're all corresponding with the appropriate day. So like case 3, day name is Wednesday, etc. So everything seems to be working. Now, there's one more thing that we have to do in this switch statement. So down here, there's always the chance that the user enters in an invalid day of the week. So in other words, if the user doesn't enter 0 through 6, then we want to be able to handle that. In other words, I want to be able to handle the situation where the number that they entered isn't in here. And inside of a switch statement, we have a special little block which is called default. So we can just say default, a colon, and then down here, this code is going to get executed if none of the cases up here are true. So if the number isn't equal to any of these numbers up here, then this code inside the default block will get executed. So down here, I could just say day name is equal to invalid day number. All right, so now we have our switch statement set up, and you can see how this is a lot cleaner than something like an if statement. So this is a lot clearer what's going on. We don't have to type out else if like 1,000 times. We don't need all those parentheses and all that stuff. Basically, it's just really clear. It's really easy to visualize what's going on. All right, so let's see if our get day of the week function is working. I'm gonna go in here, and we're actually gonna print out the value. So I'll say cout, and we'll call this. So I'll say get day week, and we need to pass this an integer. So why don't we pass it as 0, and hopefully we should get printed out here Monday or Sunday. Whoops, yeah. So over here Sunday. So Sunday would be the first day of the week. Well, let's see if we can get Monday. So I'm gonna put 1 here instead of a 0, and now we should get Monday. Yeah, awesome. All right, let's try one more. We'll try 6. So 6 is gonna be Saturday, and let's see if it works. Cool, so Saturday worked as well. All right, there's one more situation, which is where we pass in an invalid number. So if I pass in like a 10 here, now we'll be able to see that this isn't going to work. So it should tell us invalid day number. Awesome. So this is a pretty cool function, and it's working. And you can see how we can use these case statements in order to make this a lot easier. Now, here's the thing. I could have easily done this with an if statement. Nothing is stopping me from doing that. But it's a lot easier to use something like a switch statement, and that's why C++ included it in the In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to use while loops in C++. A while loop is basically just a programming structure that allows us to loop through a block of code while a certain condition is true. So in this tutorial, we're starting into something called loops. These are both extremely it does and see how it's used. So down here, the first thing I'm going to do before I create my while loop is I'm actually just going to create an integer, and I'm just going to call it index, and I'm going to set it equal to 1. So this isn't 100% necessary when you're creating while loops. We're just going to use this in our example in this tutorial. Now, when I want to create a while loop, I can basically just say while. I can make an open and closed parentheses and an open and closed curly bracket. And this is sort of like the main structure, the main outline for a while loop. Now, here's what's going to happen, okay?
Oh, nice.
Here, inside of these parentheses, I'm going to specify a condition. Now, if you remember learning about if statements in C++, this is essentially what we're doing here. So in here, we're putting a condition just like we would an if statement. And as long as this condition is true, I'm going to loop over and continually execute all of the code that's inside of these curly brackets. As you'll see in a second, we're going to put a bunch of code inside of these curly brackets, and as long as the condition up here is true, we're going to keep looping through that code. And every single time we loop through the code, we're going to check this condition. So let me just show you guys this and just kind of get a feel for up here in these parentheses. I can basically just write it. So what I want to do is I'm going to say while index is less than or equal to 5. So this is now my condition.
Bro, also, they made the newest Hyrule Warriors game, and I never even looked at it. So yeah, that's also something that could be interesting. That could also be some content.
You remember index plus plus just adds 1 to index. Alright, so what I'm doing is I'm specifying my condition. While index is less than or equal to 5, I want to execute all of this code. So I'm going to run my program, and
did you hear me?
You can sort of see already what this is going to do, but if not, we're going to run it.
Oh yeah, okay.
So,
bro, you're so quiet, it's crazy.
when I ran my program,
maybe.
basically got 1, 2,
No, it is.
3, 4, 5. Here's what's happening. Over here, I created this variable called index. I set it equal to 1. And I basically told C++ that while index is less than or equal to 5, I want to keep looping over this code. So basically what happened was, the first time we went through, we checked this condition. So we checked to see if index was less than or equal to 5. Since that was true, in other words, since index was 1 in the first iteration of the loop, we executed this code, so we printed out 1. And then we incremented index. So index was now equal to 2. Then we came all the way back up here and we checked this condition again. So we checked to see if index is less than or equal to 5. In this case, index is equal to 2. So the condition's true. Index is less than or equal to 5. So we're going to execute all of the code inside of here again. So we printed out 2, and then we incremented 2 up to 3. And then we came back up and checked the condition again. Every single time we go through the loop, we check that condition. So before we execute the loop, we execute that condition, go back up, check it again, and execute the code again. Eventually, we got to the point where index is 6, so we came up here to prove this condition, and the 6 is not equal to 5, so then we broke out of the while loop, and everyone is happy. So that's essentially what we did, and that's what a loop is. Basically, you specify a condition. As long as that condition's true, then you're good to go, and we can pretty much just keep looping through all of the code in there. And there are tons of situations where using loops is going to come in handy, and in the next tutorial, we're actually going to build a little game where we can use a while loop. But before we do that, I want to talk to you guys about a couple more things with these loops. The first thing you need to watch out for when you're using these loops is something called an infinite loop. And an infinite loop is a situation where this condition up here never becomes false. So in certain circumstances, like the condition that you specify up here won't become false, and then your loop will
Bro, this game is so nice when enemy patterns are completely random.
Now, the index is always going to be 1. So this condition up here is never
Bro,
gonna
oh
be
my
false.
god, it's the fucking
When I run my
auto
code,
target
you'll
aim.
see over here that we're just continually printing out 1. You can see the screen keeps flashing. Really what's happening is we're just looping through that while loop, and it's never going to stop. I mean, I could leave this on for years and it's never going to stop, right? Because that condition is never going to be false. So you always want to make sure that any conditions that you write with these while loops at some point are going to become false. Now, there are certain circumstances where you're going to want a while loop, but I would say, for the most part, while loops aren't going to be necessary, and they can actually be dangerous.
Did you try fixing your mic yet?
No.
What?
How am I supposed to do that? Where am I even supposed to turn?
I don't know, ask an AI how to make your mic louder when Windows and everything else didn't work. The easiest programs to use, which we haven't tried yet.
If I make this int index equal to 6, when I run my program, the code inside of the while loop is never going to execute. And that's because before we loop through all of this code...
So you're saying it's not physically possible to get closer to your mic when you speak?
To execute any of this code,
I mean, am I supposed to put it inside of me? Or
no, but bro, can I get a serious answer? Like, where is it even?
on my table, like not even 10 centimeters away from my mouth.
Yeah, well, now you speak at a good volume. Now I can understand you.
But there's another type of loop, which is called a do while loop. And I'll show you guys how we can make it. I'm just gonna cut this and paste it here. And then up here where that while you see, and this is what's called a do while loop. And the while loop is essentially just a normal while loop, but it's reversed. So instead of checking the condition and then executing the code, we're gonna execute the code and then we're gonna check the condition. So it's just sort of like the while loop. So now, I'm still gonna be able to execute this code first. Then we're going to check the condition and it's not going to let me do it again. So let me show you guys what happens when I run this. And you'll see over here, we're able to print out that 6. That's because with the do while loop, you execute the code in the loop before you check the condition. And there's a bunch of different situations where you can use while loops, do while loops. And to be honest with you, everything that you can do with the do while loop, you can do with a normal while loop. So do while loops aren't technically necessary, but in a lot of circumstances, yeah, and that's a basic overview of loops. There's actually another type of loop that we can talk about in a future tutorial called for loops. But for now, you know, practice with these while loops, you can kind of see like how they work. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to build a little guessing game in C++. And this is going to be cool because we're actually going to be able to use some of the stuff that we've been learning up to this point in the course. So we'll use things like while loops, if statements, we'll use variables. We'll use all sorts of stuff in order to build this game. So essentially how this is going to go is the user is going to try to guess a secret number. Right, so I'm going to have a secret number stored here in my program, and the user's job will be to try and guess what that number is. So the concept of the game is pretty simple, and as you'll see in a second, it's actually pretty simple to program something like this. But here's the one caveat is, if the user doesn't get the guess right on the first try, I want to keep asking them, keep prompting them to enter in another guess. So I'm going to show you guys how we can do this. So the first thing I want to do is create our secret number. So I'm just going to make an integer, and I'm just going to call it secret num. I'm just going to set this equal to, I don't know, let's say 7. So 7 is going to be our secret number. And then the next thing I want to do is create another integer, which we're going to call guess. And I'm not going to give guess a value right up front. So now we have our secret number, and we have our guess. And we want to be able to keep asking the user to guess what the secret number is until they get it right. So whenever something needs to be done continually, that's usually a good sign that we want to use a while loop. So I'm going to go ahead and say while. I'm going to make an open and close parentheses, and I'm going to make an open and close curly bracket. So inside of this while loop, we want to continually ask the user to enter the number until they get it right. So what I want to do here is specify a condition. In other words, I want to keep looping while the secret num is not equal to the guess. So as long as the guess is not equal to the secret num, in other words, as long as the user hasn't guessed correctly, I want to keep going through this loop. Now, every time through the loop, I want to prompt the user to input a number. So I'm just going to say cout, and we'll basically just say enter guess. So they're going to enter the number that they want to guess. And then down here, we want to be able to get that answer, and we want to store it in a variable. So I'm just going to say cin, 2 greater than signs, and I'm just going to put guess here. So basically what we're telling C is that we want to take whatever the user enters, store it inside of the guess. So basically, every time we go through this loop, the user is going to be guessing, and then we're going to check their guess against the secret num. If they got the secret num right, then we'll just break out of the loop. So down here, if they end up getting out of the loop, that means they got the guess right, so I can just print out you win. So we'll give them a score. Alright, so this is essentially all we need to build our guess. So I'm going to go ahead and run this program, and we'll see how we do. Alright, so it says enter guess. So I'm just going to enter in some numbers. So you can see I entered in a 3. That wasn't the secret number, so I can keep entering in different guesses. And no matter how many times I guess, it's going to keep asking me to guess until I get it right. Now, let's try to get the guess right. So the secret number was a 7. So when I enter a 7 in now, all of a sudden the condition that was in that while loop is going to be false. So the secret num is going to be equal to the user's guess, and we'll break out of the while loop, and it's going to say you win. So that's essentially how we can build our little guessing game. Now, I will say down here, I created this game using a while loop, right? But there's actually another way that we could build this using a do while loop. So your homework for this tutorial is to go off and see if you can do this using a do while loop instead of just a normal
Bro, I'm
while
actually
loop.
having
So
fun
here's the
right
thing.
now.
This is
How
actually a
about
pretty
you?
fun game, and it works out. We're able to program it really easily. But the game's a little bit unfair. It's unfair in the sense that the user gets essentially unlimited guesses. So they can guess as many times as they want. And honestly, that doesn't seem fair. So what we could do is we can impose some sort of a guess limit. So I could say, hey, the user's only able to guess like 3 times and then they lose the game. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how we can actually program something like that. We're going to need to add in a couple extra variables. The first variable I'm going to add in is going to be called guess count. And this variable is basically just going to keep track of how many times the user has tried to guess the secret number. So every time the user guesses the secret number, we want to increment the guess count. And I'm actually going to set this equal to 0 initially, because the user will have guessed 0 times. Then, down here, every time the user guesses, I'm going to increment the guess count. So I'm just going to say guess count plus plus. So now we're basically able to keep track of how many times the user has tried to guess the secret number. Alright, we're going to make another variable over here, and I basically just want to call this guess limit. And guess limit is going to specify how many times the user is able to guess until they lose. So why don't we set this equal to 3? So we'll say that the user gets 3 guesses. If they can't get the word in 3 guesses, then they're going to lose the game. Alright, and then one more thing, we want to create another variable which is going to be a boolean. And this is going to be called out of guesses. And I'm going to set this equal to false initially. So out of guesses will tell us whether or not the user has any guesses left. If out of guesses is false, that means the user has guesses left, right? Because they're not out of guesses. If it's true, it means they don't have any guesses left because they ran out of guesses. Alright, so now that we have these variables, I want to show you guys how we can modify this while loop. Alright, so down here, every time we go through this while loop, you'll see that we're letting the user guess the number. But here's the problem. If the user doesn't have any guesses left, then we don't want them to be able to guess the number. Right? In other words, if they've reached the guess limit, we don't want to give them another guess. So what I can do here is I can actually use an if statement. And what I'm going to say is if guess count is less than guess limit. So if the guess count is less than the guess limit, then I'm going to let them guess, right? Because if this condition's true up here, that means that they still have some guesses left, right? They haven't reached the guess limit. So then they're going to be able to guess, we'll increment the guess count, etc. Otherwise, though, if the guess count isn't less than the guess limit, that means that they ran out of guesses, right? So what I want to do is I want to toggle this boolean. So basically I want to say out of guesses is equal to true. So I'm telling my program that they ran out of guesses. All right, so once we've set this equal to true, now we're basically done inside of this while loop, right? So every time we go through, we're checking to see if they have any guesses left. If they do, then we let them guess. Otherwise, we tell our program that they're out of guesses. There's one more thing that we have to do to this while loop, which is modify the condition. And up here in this while loop condition, we can use this AND operator. And this AND operator will allow me to put 2 conditions inside of there. So I could say while secret num is not equal to guess, and we can check another condition. So what I want to do is I want to check to see if they're out of guesses. So I want to check to see if out of guesses, and I want to check to see if they're not out of guesses. So we're going to keep looping as long as they haven't guessed the secret word and they're not out of guesses, right? If one of those becomes false, so if they run out of guesses or if they guess the secret word, then we're going to break out of the loop. So that's essentially what's happening here. All right, so one more thing. Down here below the while loop, we have this C out, and we're just printing out you win. But this isn't technically correct because if the user runs out of guesses, then they're going to break out of the loop. But they didn't win, so we shouldn't tell them that they won. We should tell them that they lost. So what I'm going to do is make another if statement, and I'm going to check to see if out of guesses. So if out of guesses is equal to true, then I just want to print out a lose. And otherwise, if it's not equal to true, in other words, if they had guesses left, that means that they won, so that means they get the secret word. Alright, so let's go ahead and run this program and we'll see. Alright, so down here it says enter a guess. So why don't we try to lose the game? So I'm just going to say 3, 4, and 2. So this is our last guess. If we don't get it on this try, that means that we lose. So we lost the game. Alright, so looks like it's working. So now, instead of being able to guess infinite times, we can only guess. Let's see if we can win the game. So we're gonna guess like a 3, a 2. Now we're on our last guess. I'm gonna say 7, and when I enter this, it says you win. So we were able to win the game, as the grammar is. It's going in and trying different ways to do the same thing. But that's basically how we can build this guessing game. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about seeing all those different structures, like ifs and whiles and variables and all that stuff used together. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about for loops in C++. A for loop is a special type of loop which actually allows us to keep track of how many times we've gone through the loop. So in a for loop, we can use something called an indexing variable. Basically, that indexing variable will allow us to keep track of how many times we've gone through the loop. And you can also use the indexing variable to do a bunch of other stuff too. So I'm going to show you guys how for loops work. We're going to look at why they're useful and in what situations you're going to want to use them. So over here, you'll see that I have this basic program set up, and essentially I just have a while loop over here. So I have this integer, it's called index, and I just set it equal to 1. And then while index is less than or equal to 5, I'm just printing out the value of index, and then I'm incrementing it. So I'm going to go ahead and run this program. You guys can kind of see what's happening. So you'll see we're basically just printing out 1 to 5. Right, so this is a very simple while loop, and if you've been following along with this course, then you know, hopefully you're familiar with what while loops do at this point. But I want you guys to notice a couple of things. So this while loop is special because every time we go through the loop, this variable index tells us what iteration of the loop we're on. So when I run this program, you'll see over here, like the first time we go through the loop, index represents 1, right? Index has the value of 1. The second time we go through the loop, index has the value of 2. Third time has the value of 3, 7, right? So this index variable is essentially telling us what iteration of the loop we're currently on, right? In other words, on every iteration of the loop, the value inside of this index variable is changing. So in our case, it's incrementing by 1, but what it is that we have this variable, this index variable, and it's essentially just keeping track of how many times we go. In C++ and in just about every major programming language, this is a very, very powerful looping structure. In other words, there's a lot of situations where keeping track of how many times we've gone through the loop, or even just having a variable that's going to change every time we go through the loop is very useful. And in fact, this is such a useful situation that there's actually a special loop just to do something like this. So there's a special type of loop. Its sole purpose is to provide us with a structure very similar to this, where we have this indexing variable that will change every time we go through the loop, and in a lot of circumstances, it's actually going to represent what iteration of the loop we're currently on, and that's called a for loop. So I want to show you guys how we can build a for loop, and essentially a for loop is just going to be exactly what we have up here. It's just going to be a lot more compact and a lot easier for us to use. So to create a for loop, we can just say for, we can open and close parentheses and open and close parentheses. So far it looks exactly like the while loop. Now, the one difference with the for loop is instead of only having one thing up here in the parentheses, in this while loop, we just have our looping condition, right? A lot of people call this like a loop guard. Down here in this for loop parentheses, we're actually going to have 3 different things that we want to include. So, the first thing that we want to put inside of this for loop parentheses is a variable declaration, variable instantiation. So, up here, you'll notice that I'm creating this indexing variable called index, and I'm giving it a value of 1. So I'm declaring the variable, and I'm assigning it an initial value, right? I'm initializing the variable. Inside of this for loop parentheses, we can do exactly this. So I could actually just copy this line, and then down here, I can just paste this in. And instead of calling it index, why don't we just call it I? So I is going to stand for index, set it equal to 1. Then you'll notice I have this semicolon here. After I put this semicolon, we can actually put another line. So another thing that we have in this while looping structure is our loop guard, right? This loop condition. It's essentially telling us when we should loop. So if this condition up here is true, then we want to keep looping. So that's the next thing that we want to put inside of this for loop parentheses. So we're putting this variable declaration and initialization, and then down here we're also going to put the looping condition. So this is going to tell the loop when it should stop and when it should go. Alright, so then I'm also going to put another semicolon here. So you'll notice I have a semicolon here after we create this variable, and I have another semicolon here after we specify the looping guard. The next thing I want to do is put in a line of code that's going to get executed after each iteration of the loop. Up here in this while loop, you'll notice that we have this line of code over here, index plus plus. This line of code is going to get executed at the end of every single loop iteration. So the last thing that we're going to do when we go through this while loop is increment the index variable, right? So that's essentially what we're going to put over here. We're going to put a line of code which is going to get executed after every iteration of this loop. And in our case, we're just going to increment this variable I. So I'm just going to say I plus plus. We're adding 1 to I. Now again, I could put essentially any line of code here that I want. I mean, I could put like I minus minus. I could do, you know, basically whatever I want. But in our case, we're just going to increment I, just like we did up here with index. So now, inside of this for loop body, inside of these open and close curly brackets, we can just put whatever we want to do on each iteration of the loop. So that's going to be this line here. So I could actually just paste this guy in right here. And now we have a completed for loop. So believe it or not, this loop down here is actually equivalent to this loop up here. You'll notice this took 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code, whereas this only takes 2 lines of code. So, like I said, this is such a common scenario where we want to have a variable like index, which is, you know, essentially changing every single loop. It can allow us to keep track of things like the current loop iteration. It's such a common situation that there's a special loop called a for loop. The for loop, the first thing we do is create the variable, just like I did up there. So I'm initializing this variable. The next thing we do is specify the looping guard, the looping conditions. That's what I did here. And then we specify a line of code that's going to get executed after every iteration of the loop, which is going to be this I plus plus. And you'll notice that these are all separated with semicolons, and you'll notice also that I don't need a semicolon over here. So let's actually get rid of this while loop, and I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what happens when we run the for loop. And actually, I need to change these to I. So instead of this being index, I'm just going to leave it as I, and this is also going to be I. So we have int I is equal to 1. We're going to keep looping as long as I is less than or equal to 5. And then at the end, we're just going to increment I. So we're going to say I plus plus. And every time through the loop, we are printing out I. So let's go ahead and run this code. And you'll see we get the same exact output as we did with the while loop. So it's still just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what's cool about these for loops is we can essentially like keep track of a value every time we go through. And in our case, we're basically just keeping track of how many times we've gone through the loop. I want to show you guys how we can use these for loops to actually iterate through the contents of an array. So let's say I created an array of integers, so we'll just call it like nums, and I'm just going to give this an initial value. So why don't we just say 1, 2, 5, 7, 3. Right, so I have this array of integers, and it just has a bunch of numbers in it. And if you recall with integers, if we wanted to access a specific element inside of this list, I could just say like nums and then put the index in here. So if I said nums0, this is going to give us access to this 1. If I said nums4, it's going to give us access to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to give us access to this 3. What I could actually do is I could modify my for loop down here in order to actually loop through and print out all the contents of this array. So array indexes start at 0, so I'm going to start this I variable at 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to say I is less than the number of elements inside of the array. So inside of this array we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. So I'm going to say while I is less than 5, we want to keep looping, and then I'm just going to say I++. And down here, instead of printing out I could actually just print out nums I. And what this is going to do is, on the first iteration of the loop, it's going to print out nums0. On the second iteration of the loop, it's going to print out nums1. On the third iteration of the loop, it's going to print out nums2, etc. And it's going to do that all the way up to nums4, which, as you saw, that's going to be the last element in the array. So we can actually use this for loop to loop through all the elements in the nums array. So let's go ahead and do that. And you'll see over here, we're printing out all of the elements. So we're printing out 1, 2, 5, 7, 3. So that is a very common situation. We can use for loops to iterate over the elements inside of an array, and it can be really useful. So play around with these for loops. These are extremely useful. And one more time, I just want to go over the structure. So the first thing we're doing over here is we're creating a variable, or we're initializing a variable. So I'm saying int I is equal to 0. And then I'm specifying my looping guard, so my loop condition. I'm saying we're going to keep looping as long as I is less than 5. And then this is a line of code that'll get run after every iteration of the loop. So every time we go through this loop, we'll come up here, run this line of code, and then we'll check the condition again. That is the basics of a for loop. This is a very useful loop. I would say this is almost even more widely used than a while loop in a lot of situations. So you definitely want to practice and play around with these for loops. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to build an exponent function in C++. Now, an exponent function is basically a function that will take a number to a specific power. So I could write a function that I could pass in 2 numbers. Like if I passed in 3 and 4, this would basically give me back 3 raised to the 4th power. So I'm going to show you guys how we can build this, and we'll actually get a chance to use for loops. So we can use a for loop in order to build this function, and it's going to be pretty cool. So up here, I'm going to create my exponent function. So we're going to have this use an integer, so I'm just going to say int, and why don't we just call this power, because it's taking a number to a specific power. I'm going to make an open and close parentheses and open and close curly bracket. Now, our power function is going to take 2 arguments. So it's going to take a base number, and it's going to take a power number. And we're basically going to take the base number to the power of the power number. So I'm just going to say int, and then int pownum. Now, down here in our power function, we need to figure out how we can do this. So I basically need to take base num to power num. And we can use something called a for loop in order to do that. So the first thing I want to do is just create a variable. So I'm just going to call it result. And I'm just going to set this equal to 1. And then down here, I'm basically just going to return result. So essentially, our goal inside of this function is to get the result variable equal to the value of the base num raised to the power number, right? That's kind of our goal throughout this function. Let's just say for the purposes of simplicity and the purposes of this tutorial that we're only going to be able to handle positive number exponents. So we're just going to go ahead and assume that pownum is going to be positive. And that'll just make it a lot simpler and kind of help me to drive home the point a little bit better. What we're going to need is a for loop, and I'm going to go ahead and write out this for loop. Now, up here in the parentheses, we need to specify 3 things. The first thing I need to specify is a variable. So I'm just going to say int I is equal to 0. I'll start this out at 0. Now what I need to do is specify a looping condition, or a loop guard. So I want to keep looping as long as I is less than the pownum. Essentially what I'm saying here is I want to go through this loop pownum times. So as many times as the pownum specifies, I want to go through this loop. So if pownum is 3, I want to loop through 3 times. If pound is 5, I want to loop through 5 times. That's basically what this is saying. And then over here, we can just specify something that we want to do after each iteration of the loop. So I'm just going to say I++, and basically we'll just be incrementing the value of I every time we go through the loop. All right, so down here inside of our for loop, we need to think about what we can do. So we already know that we're going to be looping through here pound times, right? So what I think.
Oh, du hast angenommen. So, Bro, ich hab halt nichts gesagt, weil, du wurdest geweckt, weil du auf dem Tisch eingeschlafen bist. Und danach warst du mute und hast irgendwie 10 Minuten nichts gesagt, da bin ich einfach gelieft.
Hast du echt 10 Minuten nichts gesagt?
Ja, nachdem du geweckt wurdest, hattest du
Ich
nichts
habe
mehr
nicht die ganze Zeit
gesagt.
gemutet. Egal.
Oder hast du was gesagt, nachdem du geweckt wurdest? Also ich habe nichts gehört auf jeden Fall. Also hattest du was gesagt oder nicht, nachdem du geweckt wurdest? Und mute
Ja,
warst?
nicht wirklich, aber
Okay.
was soll ich denn sagen sollen?
Ja, nee, ich frag nur, weil ich dachte, du wärst jetzt einfach schlafen gegangen. Digga, wenn du eben schon eingeschlafen bist, warum bleibst du jetzt noch wach?
Bin ich halt wirklich, ich habe mich einfach reingelegt oder so. Die Augen zugemacht, ein bisschen.
Achso. I'm still alive, by the way.
Okay.
I mean... TOTK is kinda boring right now. I don't remember Breath of the Wild ever being this boring, so maybe it's gonna be a good thing when we finish this game 100% and we go to Breath of the Wild. Because then we're gonna be like, holy shit, this older game is less boring? Wow. Did you say something?
Possibly. If you're
Oh.
done with this. Okay. I'm gone for a second.
Okay. I'm not gonna buy them yet because I'm not sure if they're gonna get a price decrease when I finish the boss. They were here before.
ゃないよ。おお。ああ。もう。お。ああ。ああ。ああ。お。ああ。ああ。うん。
Okay, I'm back.
Jo. Big guy. EBL forever, thank you, bro.
お。ああ。あ。 Oh. Ah. Ah. Oh. Ah. Oh.
Where are we supposed to go?
I don't know.
Oh. Oh.
Ah. Hey. There we go. Alright, see you in the next stream. Don't forget to like the VODs, everything, follow. Yeah, bye.
Okay, well.